The truth is the truth until it's not the truth. And we might be having that with Democrats voting on Election Day. Numbers are not looking right in some places that would bode poorly for the Democrats, but it might be because there's a change, a shift. This might sound bad. I believe a scared electorate is a good electorate. Okay, when you get a little bit complacent, sit there, you think everything's going to be okay.
I challenge every conservative when I argue, when they talk about like the fake news or whatever, find me a single story on the left that's anywhere even close to the Dominion Fox story.
As of November 1st, 2024, who do you think is going to win the election, and what confidence level do you give that?
Okay, over there? Look at
that one. Yeah.
Okay, so, let's start with just the swing states, right? Because we got to look at the states.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Bridges. Today, we are joined by Dave Trotter. He is an expert in voting behavior, in electoral statistics, and in forecasting with a master's in political science from none other than the great Canadian University of McGill, the Harvard of Canada, as many people don't know.
Yeah, like Lisa Simpson says, and I told you, if you're the something of something, then you're not really the anything of anything.
That's
but
true.
I'll take it as a compliment, even though University of Toronto and University of British Columbia people might dispute that. But yeah,
Really?
yeah, because we're now third.
McGill in political science specifically?
I think
just
overall.
Overall.
We might be ahead of BC still, but yeah, Toronto is ahead.
Yeah, U of T
So
is pretty,
it's hard for us to handle that. Yeah.
U of T is pretty solid. It's a good school. Okay, so
I've never heard that quote before. Wow, what an attack! If you're the anything of anything, that means you're the nothing of nothing, or you're the something of something. You're not the anything of anything.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what she said specifically about McGill University.
Jeez.
Oh,
Because
really?
they were like, what if you go to McGill? It's the Harvard of Canada. And then that's when she said that. Yeah. So I'm like, I'll just, yeah,
Jeez.
I'll let that sink.
Well, not to knock your education too much, but basically you went to a garbage school
Apparently so.
with a garbage education. I'm just kidding. So you've been working in politics for like 28 years.
Yeah, I started in 1991 here in Florida, in Orange County. So state senate. Well, actually a presidential campaign, Tom Harkin for president, and then went to a state senate campaign. Buddy Dyer, who was running for state senator, he's now the mayor of Orlando. And yeah, been working in it ever since a few years ago when I just decided, didn't want to be in this business anymore.
Got you. And so when you study something like voting behavior, is this a very quantitative field? Like it's very data-driven, large data-driven specifically, or is it going to be way more qualitative?
It can be both.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the problems with looking at this is that because you have the academic side of it and then you have the practical side of it. And they're both speaking past each other. So somebody in practical politics might say, hey, listen, I have this really good idea of what might be happening or whatever. And the political science might have already studied that already. And said, okay, it's actually been tested and whatnot. On the other hand, you have academics who have no idea as to how campaigns and elections work. And so they come up with these theories that sometimes don't even make any sense. So I think it's both. And sometimes it depends on what you're looking at. It might be lacking on one side or the other.
Gotcha. So I'm curious then if is there issues basically with because you said that it's not translating between like applied versus like pure science that's going on. Is this in psychology? There's a generalization issue where like any sort of treatment, for example, that you do in a lab, you have to be really strict for the empirical model about the models that you give them. And it's a very, very like step-by-step wise treatment process. Whereas in real clinical psychology, that's almost never how therapy goes. Is there similar issues in like polling and voting behavior where you might get like an empirical, really controlled study that looks at voting behavior, but then you go into the real world and it's like, that's just not how people act? Or are you almost always collecting data from the general population?
Well, I think you're always collecting data from the general population, but I think one of the problems we have, and we're really seeing it this election cycle, is trying to find data to confirm our biases instead of having the data and then being informed to then say, this is what's happening. And this is what I do on my channel with my Nowcast models, is I look at things and say, this is what the state of play is right now. And then people will come in with this, anecdotal evidence, say, well, I talked to Jim down the street and he talked to 5 people and they said that they're voting for whoever. And I'm just like, well, at that point, like, I can't argue that, right? So, I mean, it's true. I mean, they're not lying, but it's not based in data at all. And so I think there are just these constant talking past each other's and also just people want the numbers to say what they want to say. And I had this, again, on my channel, I did one video about how Kamala Harris is in trouble in Pennsylvania. And it's just like, unsubscribes. It just happened. And unfortunately, this is the world we're in right now. So,
yeah.
I can think of actually one interesting emergent phenomenon from the kind of comparing the clinical versus the research for psychology and medication and everything. It's kind of related to polling. One thing I've heard people argue about sometimes on the data science side is that people broadly have a misconception of like what a moderate voter is. That if you go to the public, people think that a moderate voter is somebody who's like in the middle on abortion and in the middle on guns and in the middle on all these issues, because like the aggregate polling nationwide might show like a really divided thing. But the reality is there is no such, or it's very rare to find a moderate voter who's moderate on all those. It's more that you'll find a voter who is like, I really like guns, but I also really support abortion and I really support these things. So that's like a thing where when you poll like 1,000 people, you get like, you get like an aggregate data sample, but you can't just like, even if it's like a perfect cross sample of the population, you can't just copy paste that onto an individual and say, oh, I understand their beliefs now. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, and you actually see this happen in Scandinavian countries. So the Scandinavian countries are some of the only countries that have like a center party or a moderate party. And a lot of times they don't do as well because of this exact reason. And yes, you do have people that do maybe, I mean, because like with abortion, for example, how can you're going to be one side or the other. I mean, and then who determines what the moderate view is on that issue, right? So I agree with you there. That's what it is. And another misconception is that people just think independent means moderate. And they'll look at polling and say, independent. Well, Bernie Sanders is not a moderate, but he's an independent, right? So, and that's one of the problems that a lot of people have when they just look at the polling. They're just like, again, coming to their own conclusions, but you're absolutely right with that.
And then another issue I'm sure will come up is, I learned this, I think like 3 or 4 years ago, is if you want to understand American politics, the quickest thing that you can do is get away from ever looking at a national poll, because it doesn't tell you anything about anything. Even if not even necessarily when it comes to like the electoral college, like some people might think, oh, well, of course we have to look at the swing states. But even when you look at a thing like why isn't weed federally legal, right? It's got like 60% support or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, a lot of that support is in states where it is legal or decriminalized, whatever, right. And a lot of the support is in states where it's not. And that you really have to get local when it comes to looking at particular polling, because national level polls they just tell you what the whole nation thinks, but we don't vote on anything by referendum federally, so it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
Is that actually specific? Like when you take the states, which is a much more like republic style, where like each state is very distinct. That's like, as a Canadian, that was the first thing that was really interesting to me to experience, was every state, like it was weird to be like, oh, this is a crime here and like literally just not a crime here. And if you just do that crime there and then leave the state, you kind of just never go back, which is like wild. Because in Canada, that's just not the case. It's very federalized. Pretty much everything is the same except for Quebec, but nobody talks about Quebec. We don't like Quebec.
Hey, now.
But I'm curious, because that would also impact the way that you can look at generalizable data, right? When we're talking about like the average voter in America, you probably do have to go like Florida level at minimum. Whereas in Canada, you can probably aggregate at least to like Anglophones and Francophones. Yeah. Is that the case?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because there are separations in Canada. Like, for example, one weird thing in Canada is that each province has basically its own trade policy. And trading across provincial lines is like a pain.
Yeah.
Whereas really?
Yeah. Whereas like here, it's just nothing. Right. So there must be, I don't know what it is, maybe some 50-state compact or something. I don't know why it's just so easy here.
Federal Congress has the exclusive right to regulate interstate commerce.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Exactly. And so, but in Canada, it doesn't. But you're talking about a country that just has, the Constitution's only a few decades old. Right. But yeah, I mean, in Canada, well, I mean, and maybe this is something we'll talk about, because it's just the overall cultural aspect of politics in general. right? Something in Canada, they just don't have that cultural connection to politics like we do here. I mean, when we look at Americans, we're one of the only countries, maybe the Brits with the Tories, that say, I am a Democrat, I am a Republican, okay? Yeah. And this isn't something new. I was watching a video about, I like to watch old newsreels, and I was watching about the JFK assassination, like the day that it happened on CBS, and one lady in San Diego said, I'm not a Democrat, but this is, sad. And it shows that connection even goes that far back. Whereas if you're in Canada, people say, I'm voting Liberal, I'm voting MDP, I'm voting for the Tories, or Wild Rose isn't there anymore. And, yeah. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, there's that. And in Alberta, one day they said, we're going with Jim Prentice and the Conservatives, the Progressive Conservatives. And then one day they say, you know what, we're going to try Rachel Notley and the NDP. It was just this automatic change. Whereas here, you just don't see that. Like you said, everything is just.
I wonder if one of the things that plays into that, there's one of the stronger arguments I've heard for parliamentary systems, although I tend to think people think that would solve more problems than it actually would, like having more than two parties. But one stronger argument against two parties is that it might create more oppositional feeling, because now you have one enemy and one good guy. So there's less thought about who should I be aligned with, and more focus on that guy's the bad guy. So maybe that leads to stronger identification. Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time that the Liberals were official opposition now the Liberal Democrats in Britain? Jack Layton was able to be the official opposition in Canada and the Bloc Québécois, 1993. But it's going to be the Conservatives and the Liberal Party, right? So it really, I think that
with
in a
coalitions.
Yeah, exactly. Well, even now, we only saw in Canada, we're really seeing kind of the first coalition with the NDP and the Liberals, right? What I do think is that if you talk about that and trying to mitigate the issue of it being a two-party system, it's more about the way we do our elections instead of the system of government we have. So if we do ranked choice voting or something like that, instant runoff, things like that, I think that would make it something like we see in Australia or France, I think would open it up, because they have a two-round system.
Potentially, yeah. Another strong argument. I hate that I'm making these arguments because I hate parliamentary people, and I used to always argue for the two-party system. The second, there's a guy, he lives actually close by here. He's a Chinese expat.
Dr. Huey Lee.
Yeah, Huey Lee. And I wanted to, we were chatting about this, and another example that he gave is that having multiple parties, like if we had a four-party system, I found this argument very compelling. If we have a four-party system, then what happens is even if you have two main parties, and even if it seems like the two side parties aren't doing anything, it might force the candidates in the major parties to moderate just a bit. So like a real life example of this right now, I grew up hardcore conservative. My mom is from Cuba. Cubans hate Democrats for a variety of reasons, Eliot Gonzalez and the Jimmy Carter and everything else. But like the feeling of a Republican right now, if you are a conservative and if you don't like Trump, people don't realize on the liberal side how hard it is to actually vote for Kamala Harris. That's an impossible ask. Like if you're a Republican and you think that Trump is a traitor and all that, and you don't vote, I'm happy enough. Okay, that's already a big step. But if it was the case that there was like a second conservative party, like if there were two conservative parties and two liberal parties, it might be that second conservative party never even gets that popular, but your main conservative party is like, okay, hold on, we got to be careful, because if we go too crazy, everybody's going to jump ship to the other conservative party. So you might end up in a world where that second conservative party never has more than a few seats in Congress, but that main conservative party, the reins are held back quite a bit on it because they don't want to bleed off a bunch of voters to the other one. But right now, where are they going to go?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are smaller ones, Constitution Party. I mean, if you look at the left, maybe the Greens, but then that's a whole another issue here in the United States. And it's weird because green politics isn't necessarily the most liberal. If you look at Mexico, the Green Party is actually a conservative party. It's conservative green politics. But I do think it would have to be four. Because what's the biggest argument right now? Oh, if you vote third party, then the other one's going to win, right? So that's the argument. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Ross Perot, perfect example, 1992. I mean, he didn't win any electoral votes, but he got, 19% of the vote?
He was an independent?
Right. So he was an independent.
Libertarian, right?
No, he ran as an independent the first time, and the second time he started the Reform Party and then ran under the Reform Party.
Okay.
I mean, because of racial issues, George Wallace, 1968, created the American Independent Party. So there have been those times, and I think they're in times where people really don't care who wins, especially when you're talking about, let's say, George Wallace, where that was just geographically centered. But then you go look at the results. He did well in places like Michigan, places like out west and so on. So, and it's really regional, I think, with that independent. But yeah, that's the issue. You have that.
One thing I wish I would see, I heard this argument brought up once, but I've never heard a counter to it. I get a bad feeling sometimes about the third parties in the United States, in that it seems like they appear every 4 years to make a run for the presidency, but it feels like they don't do much to try to build like a coalition of not even governors, not even congressmen, but like state legislatures or state legislators, right? Like, why are there no libertarian or Green Party people? I'm sure there might be like 2 or 3, but like even in state assemblies or state congresses, or why don't they try really hard to win a seat, in the House or something? It feels like they show up for the presidential elections and that's it. And it's like,
right. I think that's more of an American thing, because if you look at like Australia, they do have a few members who are Green. I think in Britain, they're one of the members of Parliament is a Green Party. Elizabeth May was a member of Parliament. So I think there's something in the United States that they like playing the
two-party game.
There's something about they don't want to improve, and it's almost, if they do try to improve, it's going against we're fighting against the establishment idea. I mean, the only way you're going to change it is, unfortunately, if you become the establishment.
Actually, that is exactly what happens. Because if you look at Bernie Sanders, I believe, is a registered independent, but he runs in the Democratic primary. Or people like Ron Paul or Rand Paul historically are libertarians. They identify as such, but they are Republicans in the Republican Party. So they run in the main party. So even the people that do get big are like, oh, I'm going to join the main party and go do that. Yeah.
But they do that. I mean, if you do look at Bernie Sanders, and it's especially Lisa Murkowski technically ran as an independent, write-in independent back in 2010 when she got beat in the primary. So there are times, but what's weird is there are specific states that have this independent streak to them. Vermont's one of them. A lot in New England, a lot out west, but in Florida, the main part or the main states that we think of, they don't have that. So whether states accept independence or not is a big thing, because in Mississippi, Ross Perot in 1992, only 7% of people in Mississippi voted for Ross Perot, whereas I think he almost won Alaska or something like that. So
If I could go back a little bit, we were talking about the American culture of partisanship and identifying with their politics so deeply. Do you think that that's part of what's led to this kind of like fanatical cult element that's, I would say, like obviously inflamed, but one of the biggest things obviously as a Canadian as well is that experience of like, I don't actually want to talk to Americans about like where I politically lean, because it's just hot fire. It's just whether or not you're on the enemy team or not. When they ask you, they're asking you a litmus test, like, oh, are you leaning blue or red? It's like, first of all, I don't vote. I'm Canadian, but second of in the American election, but second of all, they're asking you, are you on my team, right? Whereas in Canada, if it even comes up, it doesn't really matter. Like I'll be like, oh yeah, I voted NDP, like provincially, and people will be like, oh, I didn't like Rachel Notley. That's annoying of you to have done, right?
In the U.S., it's almost like a taboo. Like you have to be careful in some like work environments or in some public environments. Like asking somebody like who you voted for is almost like asking like, what's your salary? That could be like kind of a taboo question.
Yeah. Do you think that type of American culture where politics is like in their lifeblood, which I feel like is probably in part because of the two-party system, is that there's kind of this wrestling that has to like establish between the parties to maintain balance, essentially. Do you think that that's part of what's also leading to some of the electoral issues we're seeing with this upcoming election and this kind of fanaticism, particularly on the Republican side?
As far as that's good, well, this actually goes way back to 1959, 1960, when the first, if we want to get into political science and the actual, voting behavior science,
we do.
There were a few models beforehand. Like I would say about 100 years ago, political science or voting behavior really started being studied. Started with Charles Merriam in Chicago, 1923. He looked at non-voters in Chicago, and this was right after women got the right to vote. And he's like, why are women not really voting in a certain way? And he found that women would just basically ask their husbands how to vote because it was their first time, and then they would just go ahead and vote that way. Obviously, things have changed since then, thank God. But in 1960, there was a real important book called The American Voter, and it created something called the Michigan model. And the Michigan model basically had something called the funnel of causality that basically said, hey, listen, your economic situation, your surroundings around you, your socioeconomic situation, and your voting history kind of creates this one funnel that shoots out whatever your vote is. So it shows that your connection to a group is through that lens. So maybe it's different now. And when that happened, a lot of people are saying, no, this can't be the case. Some really big political scientists said, no, you have a medium voter theorem, which is, okay, I'm here on the spectrum, and whoever's closest right or left to me, that's who I'm going to vote for. And basically this said, no, that's not the case. It's who your family is, what your economic status is, and everything like that. So this was one of the real first studies that say, hey, listen, this is culturally connected. Now, since that, it's kind of broken into other streams or whatnot. But if you go look at a voting behavior book from nowadays, you'll still see in the literature review the American voter, Campbell, Converse, Miller, and Stokes. You'll always see that. So this idea of having it being culturally connected is not a new thing, but I think maybe people are starting to see it as a new thing because of what we have right now with Trump.
Oh no. When I do a lot of debate online, and I'm trying to always model people's minds basically, so I can understand how to be more persuasive depending on the situation. And I should read books on voting, because that's something that took me a long time to figure out, is people's voting patterns and the way that we act. This is true in all areas, that we think we do things for a certain reason, but there might be another thing at play. And one thing I noticed on observation for a lot of people's voting patterns and the political and social ideas they have is you're very much subject to the environment that you're in and the people around you. It was hard for a long time for me to be if this idea is obviously true, why are you fighting so hard against it? Or you're being so irrational or whatever. But I live in a very isolated environment in that I'm an adult. I don't live with my parents. My community is one that I forged online. Right. So if a news story comes out tomorrow, I can look at the story, I can decide what I think about it, and I can just have that opinion because I'm not necessarily part of a political community. Right. But if your family members all believe a particular thing and you believe something different, there's a huge cost, there's a big penalty that's incurred there. And I think that people underestimate sometimes the immense amount of social pressure that goes into kind of shepherding or herding people's political beliefs into certain directions.
Especially in America. I can't even imagine going to dinner where my entire family is very conservative. I'm obviously very, very liberal, but it's kind of chill. They're just you always vote for the stupid, crazy hippies. And it's kind of a joke at family dinner, and then we move on. But I imagine if you're a Texas
in the United States, it's the exact opposite. Yeah. The joke is that Thanksgiving is a nightmare. Yeah.
Right. But let me ask you, in your situation, because you talk about this transformation, was there in your life, you noticed that social change or something that caused that? Did you end up being in a different group or maybe isolated from another group that then determined, okay, you're open to something else? Because that's what they basically argue. They say, hey, listen, if you grew up with your family in this group, and then let's say you move somewhere for a job and you now have a new social group, new economic conditions and all that, your partisanship can change due to the new thing. So I didn't know if that might have been something you went through.
Well, I'm a sociopath, so I'm just independent from everybody. No, I'm just kidding. My political views definitely changed as I changed classes. At my poorest, I was a hardcore, staunch libertarian. I supported Ron Paul in 2008, very big on that. As I started to climb a lot socioeconomically, especially after I had my kid and I was making decisions for him regarding school, I became way more left-leaning because I realized that playing life on wealthy mode was way easier than difficulty poor mode. And I was it is unreal how different the opportunities afforded to my son are, because no offense to him, he's 13, he didn't do anything to earn having a wealthy school district or whatever. He hasn't worked for any of this. So that caused a significant change. I've always been kind of independent from my family though, so I haven't had that pressure working on me. But I imagine that if I was a lot closer with them or living with them a lot more, that might have kept me more conservative too, though, because there'd be a bigger cost in having a different political opinion.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I'm blessed or cursed, because I am in a family that we all literally agree with each other.
Okay.
And it's just how we just complain about how bad the Democratic messaging is or something like that, instead of actually arguing about issues, because we're just pretty much on the same boat regarding everything. So again, blessing or cursed, I don't know. I like it. It's less stress, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it creates this interesting question though as well. Of, I remember I was talking to somebody from California, and I asked them, have you ever spoken to a conservative? And because of his social bubble, he actually couldn't even remember the last time he's spoken to a Republican, like ever, which is crazy to me, right? It's like, how do you even begin to understand people who view things differently than you in such a stark two-party country if you don't even have them like socially around you in any way? But also, how do you even find these people? Because it's such an intense, like, enemy friend system. How do you even bridge the political gap to build those relationships in the first place?
I mean, I think there's just been a change in what the salient issues are, or whatever somebody's values are. Okay. Because one of the biggest, I think, quotes that a lot of people talk about you hear a lot of Democrats say, oh, well, why are these Republicans voting, against their values? Well, their values might be something different than what you're perceiving them to be. Right. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. And I think now we've gone from, let's say, let's take Nixon, who, by the way, is my cousin, seventh cousin 3 times removed, but he's my cousin nonetheless.
Okay.
When you look at Kennedy Nixon, you go watch those debates. I mean, they're truly about policy. You look at it now, and the things that we're debating are just kind of, sometimes you can't even debate it. Okay, so I was at the grocery store a few weeks ago, and someone was talking about Kamala Harris and talking about the immigration. And I go, well, what about he says, we need to get rid of illegal immigrants and all this. And I'm like, well, what about the people that Trump has hired to build his hotels and staff them? Oh, well, they're paying taxes. And I'm just like, I don't know if one group it's okay and another group it isn't. I don't even know how to approach that debate. Right. And it's
I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this.
It's just like I've come to the point. Well, and that's why I kind of delve into the numbers, because it kind of removes me from that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, how do you engage and this is like the question is, it feels like conservatives, I've always had a pretty good Turing test as far as like understanding their perspective and like the value systems that they operate off of. And I could even understand it like empirically with like certain things. And I feel like this MAGA like explosion, especially the past year, but obviously kind of since Trump came on the scene, it's been like this growing issue of like, I don't even begin to know how to understand. Like I struggle with like, cause you're kind of scorched earth now with MAGA people. And I'm always like on the fence of being like, oh, is that like the right way to go? Like, I'm not
That's
really
the
sure.
Canadian in you.
It is for sure. But it's also like, I don't know, how do you talk to people that unironically think Haitians are eating dogs and cats? Like, and it doesn't really matter what information comes out to dispute that. It literally doesn't matter. They're not interested at all. I don't know what you do about that.
It's I mean, when I grew up, aging myself here, there was ABC, CBS, NBC. Okay.
Well, I haven't heard of any of those.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. It's like you had these people. You had Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings and all that giving you the news. Here it is for a half hour. Have a nice day. Now, of course, we can argue whether those news media have their biases or not. Obviously, they do, and what stories they report on obviously can determine those biases. But that's where you got your information, and then all of a sudden you start having the deregulation of the airwaves. You have people like Rush Limbaugh getting on the radio, and this kind of is the start of this, I think, type of movement. Now you have the internet, you have social media and everything, that it no longer is you got to be faced with the information that's confronting what you have. You have something that agrees with you. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and go to this website, so therefore it agrees with me. And what really makes me wonder is maybe this conspiracy theory, because when I was a young kid, there was a newspaper, well, not a tabloid, that was called the Weekly World News. And it would be like space alien has child with Hillary Clinton or something like that.
Oh my God, my grandma used to, you're talking about things like the National Enquirer.
Right. No, the National Enquirer. No, National Enquirer is actually like tame yeah, but Bat Boy is in the Weekly World News.
Okay, Bat Boy was a big. I think the National Enquirer broke Bat Boy. Okay,
right.
My grandma used to buy those. We call them tabloids, but yeah, back then she buys them all the time.
And it's like now, I mean, I always thought of it as a joke, but then I'm like, did people buy that because they really believed it? Because the stuff that I just start hearing now, not of everyone, but of a small, the whole QAnon thing. Right. Oh, yeah. JFK Jr. is going to show up at Daley Plaza on the day of his dad's assassination and say he's going to be Trump's running mate. OK, I mean, it's like I can't even figure out how that.
I feel like of all the QAnon claims, I feel like there was some legitimacy to that one. No.
Uh-oh.
I'm just messing with you. Okay.
No, is Jeff. Well, I mean, okay.
I'm messing with
No,
you.
no. But it's like
sorry.
there's so many JFK things out there nowadays. It's like now it's like bled into Junior, right? It's just
JFK is definitely like a trauma word for me. Like as soon as I hear there are words that come up politically. I'm sure it's if you like if I
Is that the Cuban in you?
No.
Okay, because like Canadian with her, so I didn't know.
No, it's the political like conversations. Like if I hear somebody bring up like the Federal Reserve, I know I'm about to hear the stupidest macroecon takes in the world. Or if I hear somebody bring up like gold standard or Podesta or I think there's like a trifecta, try something, a triangle. There's three things I think that are like destroying people's ability to have good political opinions right now. I think one of them is we've become more focused on a larger scale. Like we're very nationally in tune now because of the internet, and we're less locally in tune. And people have this really bad perception. I talk about this a million times on my stream. If you're watching, you've heard me say this a million times. But people falsely assume that our bodies and our minds are evolved to just be truth machines, and we'll figure out like that's true. Rather than I just need to survive and make kids and feel good along the way, basically.
Right.
And because of that, people assume that if you put more information in front of somebody and give them more choices, they'll always make the best choice. And the marketplace of ideas and freedom of speech and the best will rise to the top. So this national level perspective on things makes it so that we have a really hard time discerning true statements from factual statements, because the less local a statement is, the harder it really is for me to ever fucking know, right? If you're going to tell me that a bunch of people have moved into my house and are destroying my basement, I know that in a minute. If you tell me people have moved into the neighborhood and are causing trouble, I know that immediately. I go outside every day. If you tell me people have moved into my city and are causing trouble, I probably see it depending on my drive, and I've talked to people that have firsthand direct experience with it. Right. And maybe I even hear on the local radio the mayor talking to the firefighters, the police, and they're talking about it. If you tell me that 30 million Ukrainian biolab members are creating DNA to poison Russians, or 50 million illegal immigrants have come across the border, I don't know, maybe, right? Like I can find the staunchest anti-immigration person ever, and assuming they don't live at the border, not right. Austin, not like at the actual border, right? You don't know if 10 million.
McAllen, that's where they're at.
Yeah, you don't know if 10 million illegals have come in, 50 million, 100 million, 1 million. You have no idea.
Right.
But because we're so nationally focused, so the first part, you don't know what's true anymore because you can never verify it, right? Was FEMA actually blowing away supplies and stealing money? I don't know. I don't know anybody who.
I want to come back to that. So I'll let you do the other, because there's some interesting study that was done like years ago. But go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So that's one prong. The second prong is gatekeepers. I guess it goes along with the information thing. It's important. I'm sorry, but there's nothing else in your entire life where if you don't understand something, the suggestion would be, we'll try like reading 100 other people that say things in this vein. People will always point you towards this guy is really expertised in this field. And I'm not even trying to be like academically elitist. It might be like he's got a lot of experience. He's a good, he does apprenticeships. This is a great mentor. This is my dad. Like you always point to these people.
Right.
There's never been a time in any part besides politics where people are like, the solution to misinformation is just more speech, just more voices screaming at each other in a cacophony of fucking crazy noise. I wrote misunderstanding for the third one, but I don't know what that is. Maybe I'll remember it.
But I do want to talk about gatekeeping as well,
go for it,
because that's going to be a different, but maybe in a different way. Because when I got involved with politics, there was, I don't necessarily would say there was gatekeeping, but you actually had to participate. So when I was, back in 1991, when the internet was in its infancy, if you wanted to be politically involved, you had to get in a car, go to an event, go to a meeting, do stuff at that meeting, be involved, then drive back home, right? And if you wanted to be involved, go to a convention. You had to go and do that. Nowadays, you just, you grab this, get on Twitter for 10 seconds, and you have a political opinion.
I like that background.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I gave that away, huh? So,
snatch that one.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, you had to be involved.
For people listening or didn't see it, it's a hair.
He had a giant picture of my face. Oh, or a hair falls. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So, no, but yeah, and that's the thing, is that nowadays you don't need to go through that. And I think, and I don't necessarily say that's gatekeeping, but that's kind of participation that you just don't see anymore. So you're just seeing it, and it's like, yes, that's actually more people being involved in the process. And it's like, I don't want to sound bad saying is this a bad thing? Because we should always be saying it's democracy. Everyone should be involved in all that. But I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing nowadays.
Just to be clear, maybe I wasn't clear enough. Also, the misunderstanding like I had, I rolled that into the human, like how the human mind works. That was part of my first pick. But when I said gatekeeping, I mean for the people that are disseminating media, the people that are at the top doing it, that it is important to. And gatekeeping has a very negative connotation, but gatekeeping is essential for everything. When I go to the hospital, I want my doctors to be gate kept. I want to make sure they went to school. I want to make sure they've done their, their residency. That's important. So yeah, having people that are in charge of like what is important, what information we're presenting is really important. Yeah, that's what I meant. But I think more people participating is generally good. Well, maybe not participating in the reporting or the reporting of the punditry side though.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about the first thing you mentioned about what the truth is or whatnot, there was a political science study done, I would say maybe about 15 years ago. It was at the end of Obama's administration, and they brought in a bunch of Republicans, and they said, we want you to answer this questionnaire. And it would have falsehood. It had truth in it, but falsehoods on both sides. Okay. And they said, we want you to answer this as truthfully as possible. And they would say, okay, Obama was born in Kenya, blah, 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 blah.
And then they would like evaluate the truthfulness of the statements?
Yeah, well, they would go in and so like some things we know, right? I mean, unless Obama was the smartest 1-year-old or 1 day old or took a time machine, went back to Honolulu and put his birth announcement in the paper, he was born in Honolulu, right? But what they did is then they said, we're going to go ahead and give those same people, if they answer it correctly, a $100 Amazon gift card. Those answers all of a sudden became correct on both the Republican and Democratic side.
Oh, I had this moment where, oh man, I really should read this. I need to read more stuff.
I mean, I don't know if it's like 100%. I need to look it up, but it was like, it was a $100 Amazon gift card. So it had to have been, it had to have been in the early 2010s, maybe.
Yeah.
So I'll look that up. I'll see if I can get that to you.
I believe you 100% because I had this thing where what I would start to do is like, I'm going to bet people on their political opinions now because we need some fucking accountability because you guys say some crazy shit. Yeah. And in my mind, I thought two things were going to happen if I start betting people. Either one, I'm going to make a lot of money because these people are fucking crazy. Or two, they're going to say, fuck you, I'm not going to bet, screw you. Or they're just going to ignore it, right? And the third thing emerged that was shocking to me, that it simultaneously was amazing and so disappointing at the same time, which is where somebody might say something like, I'll be like, Trump is going to be in jail. You know that, right? So it's like, Trump is never going to jail. You're completely fucking wrong. Or like, Trump is winning the next election. You're dead wrong. 99% chance of winning. It's like 99%. So if I bet you $100 on this, you pay me $10,000 or whatever. If I want, you're going to give me 99 to 1 odds on this particular thing. And rather than them saying, fuck you, or accepting, what they would do is okay, he is kind of old. Maybe there's some charges that could come out. It was like this well of information just like sprung in their mind. I'm like, wait a second. So you have everything here.
They know.
You knew all this stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've shifted away from is because I used to think that like, God damn, the electorate is just fucking so beyond toast in America. They're so dumb. They're not dumb though. There are like, this happened a lot too. I bring this example up a lot. When COVID rolled around and we were talking about all the hydroxychloroquine and the ivermectin people, I'm getting these like retrospectives, N=7, like in a Indonesia or whatever. I'm like, bro, what the fuck? What, like, seriously? Like, you're going to compare this against my prospective, randomized double-blind RCT? Like, come on, what are we talking about?
Right. Yeah.
But in Florida here, when Ron DeSantis, I think the state legislature banned, trans treatment for for minors. I saw the words in the bill, and they're saying, due to a lack of prospective RCTs, we don't feel like trans healthcare is good for youths at the time. I was like, wait a second. Oh, wait. So you do know what good like medical research looks like? How? Yeah. There's like social factors that are turning people's brains on or off in certain subjects. Oh yeah. On the last example of this, did you ever? I don't know how much you watch of YouTube or the online world or whatever. There was the best example I've ever seen this in my life laid out so clearly. Joe Rogan talking to Matt Walsh in a YouTube clip.
No, I mean I know both, but yeah.
Joe Rogan lays out the most epistemically sound reason ever for rejecting flat Earth. He says the flat earthers are ridiculous. You'd have to have the whole world involved in this, all the governments, all the academic institutions. How would they even make money? What's the point of it? And Matt Walsh is like, yeah, how absurd. And Matt Walsh is like, yeah, it's like the guys that denied the moon landing. And all of a sudden, Rogan's mind is like, well, hold on a second. I don't know about the moon landing stuff. And it's like, wait, you just laid out the perfect logical framework to know why that would be ridiculous to fake. But now because of like other stuff associated with the moon landing, it's very frustrating.
I think it's really interesting looking at how people think. I'm super curious about, sorry, I keep saying that phrase and I need to stop saying it.
Right.
The study that you're showing, I wonder how many people, when they changed their answers to the correct answers, the people who disagreed with those initially would just say, well, this is what the establishment wants.
That's
Probably what they're doing, right? They don't truly believe it's true. They just know what the mainstream is saying, and they probably see you as researchers that are left-leaning, so they'll just appeal to the left-leaning mainstream.
Well, and this is one of the reasons they put in some misconceptions regarding conservatives to see if they would correctly answer those. And I think they did it on the left too. I think they might have done both.
Yeah.
So I think they tried to mitigate it by kind of making the balance to see if you could see which side. But yeah, I mean, that's the obvious, drawback of what that could be. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so did they control for that in any ways? Obviously with the left leaning, do you know what they found? Did they find people with a certain political penchant were more likely to kind of be dishonest and then switch to being more honest when there was an incentive to do so?
I mean, that's what the conclusions were that they were going to, they did switch. I'd have to go specifically into it. It's been like 15 years since
I was just curious if there was a
Yeah.
bias of like, we're like left-leaning people more likely to be honest regardless of the incentive.
I think it was more right-leaning would like
Change.
deviate from the truth more and then flip, like snap back, whereas the left were just not as, like for example, I think one of them was, do you think that, do you think 9/11 was an inside job or something? And like with the left, they found it could be half and half. Right. Whereas if, do you think Obama was born in Kenya? An overwhelming majority of the conservatives thought that.
Right.
So I think there was a little bit less wiggle room. I'd have to look at that again. It's been so long since I did. So yeah.
Yeah, I read this study super recently that was really concerning to me, and maybe I'll steelman the conservative side as well. The study basically was looking at cognitive bias within political leanings. So specifically, they had to evaluate truth statements as well, and then like basically hedge how confident they were in the truth statements. And I'm not remembering all of the details. I think there's an extra element to this, but essentially what they found is that like regardless of the bias of the information given, consistently conservatives were more confident in their truthfulness and less accurate as well, right? So if they gave a statement and said, I think the statement is true, when they gave it a percentage of how confident are you that it's true, they tended to vastly overestimate as well. To a pretty significant degree. And so I guess the common argument I can hear, like my dad's voice being like, yeah, but that's because liberals are running most of these studies. And so a lot of the questions, even though when they're trying to be balanced in the questions, they're never really that balanced. They're never really asking the liberal people the questions that they're going to fail on, like IQ or something like that.
Well, how long ago was that?
This study came
Was it
out
more recently?
Yeah, it was like 2024.
I think there's been a switch in that time. Okay, that now people have just narrowed. Again, this is just my belief. Okay, I haven't looked at any research on this. It just seems like we've become really, really narrow in where we want to get our information. I mean, at least I myself, I do that. Okay, I watch France 24 and MSNBC. That's maybe go over to CNN. That's my area. And I disagree with them a lot on all. I mean, I look at France 24 as just more factual information about what's happening, but I'm very interested in France as well. So that's kind of, but they do have an English channel, but I watch their French one mostly. I think just from the study of the Amazon card I told you to this, we might have just really gotten to the just confirming our biases to an unhealthy amount.
One of the disappointing things about that, though, is you brought up something earlier about your situation. And one of the things I try to stress to people is, I mean, like on a philosophical and a metaphysical sense, the reality is constructed in the mind. I don't really know. I could be in a straitjacket in a room somewhere. Sometimes I hope I am. But I think that you're a real person. I'm talking to you. My brain is putting together this image of everything in my head. Your reality is very much the perception of that reality. And I think that when people are when people are looking at the media environment they live in, there's this weird game that's been played where if I were to go back, 15 years and I were to ask my mom, where do you get your information from? She might say Rush Limbaugh, talk radio, and Fox News, right? And you might think, okay, well, that seems like a very narrow set. Like if you just say like CNN or whatever, it's CNN and Jon Stewart. Okay, that's a very narrow set of media. But then today, somebody might say, I get a way more varied a balance of media. There's like 10 or 15 different people that I listen to, and there's been this weird phenomenon where there's a larger set of people that you listen to, but oh my God, the homogeneity of opinion is absurd today. Like I joke that like if you get like one opinion from somebody, I can predict like 20 other like different things. Like if you tell me what you think about like Andrew Tate, I instantly know what you think about climate change, the IMF, George Soros, Ukraine, Russia, whether Euromaidan was a coup, whether Trump is being charged like maliciously or not, if the mRNA vaccine, so like you have so many political opinions you can predict, and there is a shocking level of homogeneity of similar beliefs, of identical beliefs in these groups of people. And so people have kind of like trick themselves sometimes, I think, into thinking like, oh no, I do like a balanced diet of media or a balanced diet of news. And it's even extended to political persuasions a bit, such that sometimes people say like, oh no, I have liberal friends, or there are liberals that I support. And it's like, wait, hold on. Let me guess. The liberals you support are RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, right? Yeah.
I knew what you were going to say.
Exactly. Like, okay, dude. Yeah. And it's like, and it's so annoying.
Well, and on top of that too, I mean, you're right. You do have those people that say that, but we've really come to this point that you can get more information. Yes, they might have looked at Rush Limbaugh and all that, but now they have Newsmax and other things that just kind of do that. But I do think a lot of people just comes to a point of just wanting to be right, and a lot of people maybe just want to take the rationality or rational thinking out of it. So I'll talk about the one. I'm very much into the data. I am not into the conspiracy theories at all. But the one that I would say that I could adhere to or believe possibly is, and I have one.
Justin Trudeau is Fidel Castro's son.
No, I thought, no. He's the son of the, no, Ted Cruz was the Zodiac Hitler. No, because I think I forgot. There was something with Ted Cruz and Fidel Castro and something like that back in when they were on the primary.
Sorry.
But no, you're okay, because I was like, I mean, that's it, right? But no, like Flight 93 could have been shot down.
Oh, I used to think that was possible.
And I'm sitting there going, but there's a rationality. It's not like, oh, well, the CIA did this and all this. And I'm like, no, that was a plane going toward the Capitol. It could have caused a lot of destruction. It makes logical sense to actually shoot it down. Do I think they did? No, but it would make sense if they did it. And the problem I have with a lot of these is as soon as you get some of these conspiracy theories, then you get one thing that builds on another and another. And it just seems to, for me, in a lot of cases, get out of hand. Doesn't mean they can't be true, but I just kind of want the logical, at least in my head, logical, just, okay, that makes sense that they would shoot that down because it was going to Washington. It wasn't like, oh, there's some secret briefcase on there that had the, this, that, or the other. So, yeah.
This is a joke I make a lot when I'm arguing and screaming at these people. So, like, at least your conspiracy theories used to make sense, right? Like, Jews did 9/11. Okay, I get it. Israel really wanted Saddam Hussein gone. He shot Scud missiles in the Gulf War. Okay, fine. It makes sense. There's no good empirical backing for it, but it makes sense. Yeah. But like, the things today, like the United States has weather machines to create hurricanes, to destroy property in North Carolina so they can seize like if the US is this all powerful evil government, why wouldn't they just like expropriate the company? So that seems like way fucking easier than creating false hurricanes. Like what the fuck? Or like the
fires in Hawaii. What, a year and a half ago, they were talking about you're going to burn it all down so you can put up condos and hotels, right?
Why not just buy, like, there's eminent domain. You don't need to do that.
Yeah, true.
You don't need Jewish space lasers to take the property, right? Or even
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I had to drive through a congressional district on the way here. So
Jesus, the House is a crazy place. I hate that I have to say this because I'm a big institutional guy. I'm like, institutions are big or whatever. But like if somebody's like, did you read this? And it's like House report, and I see like Jim Jordan's name on it. I'm like, okay. I know it's from the House of Representatives. I know it looks official, like it's from Congress, okay? But these people are insane.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. Like the conspiracy, like why, like Bill Gates is an American citizen. George Soros is, I believe, an American citizen. Like why why would these people want to destroy the country so much? Like, if you were to give me a conspiracy, like we go to the Middle East to steal their oil, okay, that makes sense because you at least want to make your country better. But like, why are these guys so invested in killing all of us? We're their own country. Like, doesn't make sense, you know? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. Or like the vaccine thing. Like, why would you want, like, they want the weak and idiot people to take the vaccine. Like, why would you kill your most ardent followers? Like, I could understand if you think like, oh, the vaccine is making you like super strong or something, because that would be what you'd want. Like they sneak TRT into or something. What the fuck? Yeah.
And it comes now to, at least for me, that as I get more and more into the data, it's like I almost kind of like put on blinders to what's happening in the real world. So people ask me, like over the last few days, oh, what do you think about this that happened in the news and the polls and all? I go, I've been looking at early voting trends. It's like I don't even know what's happening in the bigger world because I just been focused on this. So I've even become to the point that if I don't see data that backs something up, but then again, we talked about this earlier. I don't know if we were talking about it on the this earlier, the podcast, or just in general, just that the methodology still has to be right. That goes back to what you were saying with Jim Jordan, right? Okay, all of a sudden you got to ask yourself, okay, if there's some quote unquote study, what is the methodology? How do they do it to get to their conclusions? That's where I think the big problem is. Yeah.
I was going to say, similar to what you were saying about the news, right? About how like, yeah, there are 10 different people that you can now listen to and you are listening to, but they're all saying the same stupid shit, right? Like they're not really different. Even when you get into like academic spaces, especially pop academic spaces, there's so many people collecting so much data. Like there's more data. You can buy data. There's more data than we've ever had ever, and anyone can get access to it. And the problem is that almost nobody understands methodological like processes of what makes your data like valuable.
Well,
right?
Yeah, I mean,
nobody knows this by and large.
Right. I don't know if you know. I mean, and this is becoming a kind of a little tiny subgenre in YouTube, talking about academics fudging their data. And I think so. We're talking about people from Harvard and stuff. I think the president of Stanford also did it as well.
I follow this stuff super closely.
Right. And it's just like, there you go. And they really have to get they have to really get forensically into it in order to do it. Like they're looking at spreadsheets and seeing when the metadata, the time matched up and all that kind of stuff.
It's becoming a new science, the meta science of evaluating science protocol itself.
And it's like, if you can't trust that, then where the hell are we?
Exactly, right? Which is why like when I see this conspiratorial stuff and it's like increasingly crazy, I also look at like our peer review system or anything like that. And I'm like, there's some level of culpability. There's culpability in multiple areas. I think the media is like probably first and foremost, social media and like major media pundits are like the number one bad actors actively like just like guzzling Russia's money and spewing out garbage, usually not even knowingly, right? Like Tim Pool not knowing he was getting paid by Russia is the funniest thing ever and should be like the biggest warning sign to him. But also, even when you like get into the academic space, because there's such a huge pressure, for example, to be releasing data, to be releasing important data, to have significant findings. They don't want to publish non-findings.
Right.
No, like this is I used to work at a stigma lab, so we talked about how language creates stigma. This idea that if you change language, you can change stigma has pervaded for like almost 15 years now because nobody wants to publish the data that shows it's non-effective, even though it's not effective. Like most stigma labs have just kind of given up. The most you'll find is like a number of editorials being like, can we stop talking about how if you call somebody schizophrenic versus a person with schizophrenia, that does anything. It doesn't do anything. And we know that, but nobody publishes on it, right? And so you get all these biases. And then you look at the lay people and you go, but trust our institutions. And unfortunately for them, all they see is these little issues. And they're like, well, how do I trust it? Because nobody thinks about when the institutions are going well. Nobody thinks about when academia is doing well. They only see when, 13 years of Alzheimer's research is just fudged. It's just garbage. We've wasted billions of dollars on it because the first guy who had the breakthrough on the beta amyloid plaques and whatnot just like lied. He just made shit up.
But I think that is one problem with academia. It's just kind of like in the world of practical politics. Everyone wants to be right and find something. And like when I do my nowcast model for the elections, people say, who do you think is going to win? I'm like, I don't know. Okay. It's like the goal of what I'm trying to do is not trying to find the next president. It's trying to figure out where we are in the election based on electoral history or partisanship or something like that. And it's just not at a point of, oh, I say this person's going to win or this person's going to win. And it's okay. I mean, and this happened years ago, but it doesn't happen now with at least with political science, and I think others. It's okay to have your hypothesis, do the research, find that it didn't actually apply, and then say, hey, okay, I had this idea. I did this. I said, so one of the things I was researching was, do people do vote choice based on who they think is going to win? And I looked at the ANES studies and all these other things. I didn't see a relationship, but there's value in that as well. So I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, okay, do you see that? And I'm like, no, I didn't. And then go ahead and publish that. And I think that's something that we're missing. I don't know about in your field, but at least in political science, that is, we need to know when something doesn't apply as well.
Yeah, we all learned the scientific model, and then we got into like career academia, and we all like forgot about the scientific model to some degree, where it's like not knowing something is like the basis of everything. It's the fundamental assumption that you should make as a scientist.
Yeah.
But a lot of scientists are human, so they begin.
They want to be a dean somewhere. They want to be somewhere where they can get.
You want to be the one to like discover how axons work for the first time ever.
Right.
Like you want to be that exciting guy, and of course you do.
Hey guys, what's up? I'm excited to talk to you today about our sponsor, Aura. I'm sure you guys have heard, but tons of social security numbers and other personally identifying information has been hacked from databases, leaked from databases, and stolen from virtually every American at this point. Just recently, over 2.9 billion records were hacked from National Public Data, which is a service that has all sorts of personal information that are contained for things like background checks. If you've ever had your data stolen before, you know how invasive and frustrating it is to deal with the onslaught of phone calls, of entering new information, of delisting all of your stuff on websites. It's a huge hassle. I've had people that go after my personal information for a whole bunch of different reasons, and I've been through this process of having to unlist cards, of having to apply for new stuff, of having to change and update information as a result of people going after your things. Thankfully, Aura will monitor your information, and they check things like social security numbers, like addresses, like all sorts of other things that are listed in public databases, so and ones that are found in non-public areas. Not only does Aura monitor all of this information for you to let you know if your information has been compromised, they will also back up that monitoring with a $5 million identity theft guarantee.
They've also packed in a bunch of other little tools to keep you safe online, and it's all contained in one app. It's kind of fire. Now, if you would like to check it out, you can go to our link, aura.com/bridgespod. You get 14 days for free, which is more than enough time to figure out if any of your data is compromised. And look, National Public Data isn't going to be helping you. In fact, probably they're not going to get slapped on the wrist for any of your data getting leaked. So don't leave yourself or your family exposed to any kind of shenanigans, problems, gripers, any of the like. Head up aura.com/bridgespod and get your free trial and stay safe.
I'm going to go buy it right now.
Yeah, I sold you on it.
Okay.
Can I
think it's also on the peer review thing and on the academia thing too.
Yeah.
I watched, I think it was a fucking Vsauce video. When the moon orbits the Earth, I think the mistaken assumption is that the moon is like pulling like these waves as the moon goes around, and that's where the tides come from, which is like kind of true. But the what's actually happening is like every single atom exerts some gravitational pull on every single other atom. So it's like, it's not just like big waves being pulled, it's every single itty bitty part of the ocean is being pulled as the moon moves around, and it's all these little things that push people in a certain direction. And I think when it comes to publishing on things that are popular or are persistent in the literature, there's a lot of pressure, not just to publish, but there's pressure at like every single stage of the, like what you even learn about. One thing that was, that I saw, I think it was an article in Nature. I don't think it wasn't a study or anything, but there was a complaint from researchers that during COVID, it became incredibly difficult to study anything that wasn't ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, because people wouldn't enroll in studies and they weren't interested in being part of studies or trials that weren't testing explicitly those two drugs. So if that is the case, well, think about if you're participating in a trial. Okay, well, Trump told me that, and all these other people are saying these are the two good drugs. I don't want remdesivir, more like kill my momsivir, right? I don't want to try these things, right? So you don't have participants. You get people that are publishing studies on these drugs, and everybody's asking questions about them. So there's an incentive to publish more about them. People aren't funding research on these other things because nobody really cares as much, and you have this whole system of incentives to where 5 years from now, I bet we have more fucking data on ivermectin than we ever thought we would ever have on the effectiveness of it for treating a viral disease.
Hey, it works on horses.
Yeah, exactly.
On horses.
And then if you're a virologist or an immunologist or somebody that works in research, you're like, okay, well, what should I study? And then, you pour over everything. You're like, okay, well, I guess, there's a lot of interest in this area. And then you move, and you have like all these itty bitty little pressures that are like moving people in these bad directions.
Yeah.
But the biggest frustrating thing I have about that is there are corrective mechanisms, and academia by and large has produced a lot for society.
Yep.
And I'm actually a big fan of originally I thought it was stupid. I am a big fan now of the Great Divorce, because for all these people that don't believe in medicine, don't believe in the FDA, don't believe in government spending, go make your own country and let's come back in 50 years and whoever's doing better, they can rule the joint country again. Because these people that are
you sure you want that?
Yes. Because these people that are constantly critical of science and technology and government institutions, they're not like people that are generally producing things or inventing things or discovering things or contributing to the overall body of knowledge. They're just constantly critiquing on the side without even making great critiques. Their predictions are all wrong and dumb. They have no accountability. People will look at Fauci and go, he said one statement wrong one time about whether or not we should buy masks, and that's enough to impugn the entire NHS or the entire it's not NHS, that's National Health Service. Our entire medical arm of the entire government, right? But like somebody like Tim Pool or Joe Rogan or Dr. Robert Malone or whatever, these people could be wrong over and over and over and over and over and over again. And there's like no accountability whatsoever.
Isn't that how YouTube works, basically, the comment section?
Kind of, yeah. But I mean, it translates to like media environments as well.
Yeah,
there will never. I challenge every conservative when I argue, when they talk about like the fake news or whatever. Find me a single story on the left that's anywhere even close to the Dominion Fox story.
And that was coined originally by Nancy Pelosi.
Really?
Talking about fake news with the Republicans. They just turned it around, and give Trump credit there. He always, whenever, I'm rubber, you're glue, he does that pretty well. I mean, it doesn't always stick, but it sticks nonetheless. But yeah, Nancy Pelosi started that. Then they just took it over.
What do you mean she started that? Sorry, did Nancy Pelosi?
She said the fake news thing. Like, she was the one that first started saying there's fake news out there.
Coined the term.
Yeah, coined the term fake news.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then they just went ahead and ran with it.
Yeah.
But they don't even care anymore.
No, they don't.
Vance,
They have alternative facts.
Yeah, there was that statement, and then there was J.D. Vance about the Haitian dog story, where he said, this was like
Fuck it, it was me.
Well, yeah, the statement was like, listen, if we have to make stories up to get people to care about issues, and I'm like, the fuck?
Yeah. Didn't he say that in the debate, or was
he said that in an interview? I think it was on CNN or something.
Yeah, it was like a few days, like maybe a week after the debate.
Wild, and it's wild that you'll hear that. But this is the problem with the divide, right? Is that I'll show that to my dad, and he'll be like, "Well, Kamala's also very evil, very lying," and then he'll point to a number of legitimate criticisms of Kamala, right? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, those are all legitimate criticisms. I agree. There are flaws within the Democrat Party. I would just wholly agree with that. The issue is that like there's some fundamentals that seem to be missing, right? Like it feels like we really have like one institution that's like aimed to be self-corrective and has errors and is dishonest a number of times and kind of hypocritical sometimes, but by and large is oriented in the right direction because the fundamentals are there. They still value the Constitution, they still value the electoral process, and they still respect the electoral process. And then we have like another side where it's like, okay, yeah, Kamala was incorrect about a few things. I think in the debate, she lied about like one or two things or was like incorrect in her statements, right? And it's like, yeah, but on the other side, you have somebody who like explicitly doesn't value the Constitution, somebody who explicitly denies the electoral process, right? Like I don't know why we're quibbling. Anyways, I'm circle jerking, but yeah.
No, I'm insane. I hear you.
So when it comes to, can I grill you about voter behavior?
Okay.
The science of it.
Okay.
I used to be really dubious of all polling.
Yeah.
I basically thought it was garbage and useless, and there's literally no point in doing it.
Jeez. Yeah.
So when you're polling people electorally, I'm probably going to get a little bit esoteric here. You're polling the general population. How are you vetting to make sure that the data is properly generalized, because I know one of the worst nightmares of polling and surveying the general population is actually getting a general population with as neutral incentives for their responses as possible.
It becomes harder, I think, in the United States as we get bigger. But I also think the problem is, well, it depends on where you're getting your data from.
Okay.
Right. If you're, I mean, you would do random digit dialing back in the day. Okay. Because at that point, let's say 1970s, where everyone had a phone. They didn't have caller ID. They didn't have answering machines even really back then.
Yeah.
You pick up the phone, you don't know who's on the other end. So you could do random digit dialing and get a pure random sample. Okay, so that's why back in the day, I think there was a lot more trust maybe in the polls. Now you have a number of things. You could go off the voter roll, okay, of people who are registered to vote, let's say in Florida. But then what you're having in the big problem we're having right now at polls are a lot of opt-in polls.
Okay.
So that means that you see an advertisement somewhere, says you want to be in a poll. And then you opt into that poll. And then whenever they want to do something, run a poll, they just go ahead and send you an email. And that takes away the randomization of it right away, because it depends on whether you put that advertisement on Facebook or on TikTok. You're going to get a huge...
self-selecting to even take the polls in the first place.
Exactly. So...
And then just to explain, so for the audience, you were talking about two concepts. One is when you're making a poll, you want something that is cross-sectional, as in if there's 100 people that you poll, if America had 90 white people and 10 black people, or if the country had 90 million white people and 10 million black people, you would hope that on a poll you would have like 90 white people and 10 black people.
Each person should have the same chance of being represented in that, or be called in that poll.
Yeah, but as soon as you have stuff like opt-in polls or stuff that's restricted to certain platforms technologically, right? Like if I were to ask you very obviously, I polled a classroom of kindergartners and this is what they thought about the election, you would immediately say, okay, well, these people are 6 years old. Why this is polled, right? But people don't immediately understand what's wrong by saying like, oh, we polled like 100,000 people on TikTok. And I was like, okay, well, who's likely to use TikTok? Who's likely to opt into a poll? I think there was a famous number that people used to say like 97% of women were unhappy with their marriage or whatever. It's really and I think that poll was people that had an opt-in. They wrote a letter because at the end of like a certain romance novel or Vogue or something, it was like, write a letter and tell us how you feel about your marriage. Well, who's going to write the letters? People that are like, oh, I love my husband. No, of course not. It's going to be
It's like who leaves the Google reviews for the restaurants.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Yeah, and who leaves the stars.
Well, the answer now is bots, but no. But okay, yeah. So go ahead, yeah. So opt-in polling and everything changed a lot.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's the thing, and you hit the nail on the head. It goes. So you can either change to who you want it to be, or it just does not become representative just because it's garbage.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's where we are right now. And then after 538 came out and other aggregators, just everyone, their mother just started creating a polling firm. Okay, back in the day, it was one of the, you had Gallup, you had the Harris poll way back in the day, and others. You'd have three polling firms. And when I worked in politics, when I started in 1992, every 2 weeks a poll would come up. Like, oh, okay, that's where we're at. And that's all you'd think about it. But now it's just like, okay, I go to 538 and I see 27 polls there. And, they're presenting it in a different way. And even they're wrong when they talk about accuracy of polls and everything. There are issues. But I know a lot of people who are in the business say, oh, this poll had an A+ rating from, or was the quote unquote most accurate poll in 2020. So, and there's a lot of reasons why there are problems with those.
Yes.
So yes.
I was going to say most accurate you should take very lightly.
And there's like actually a really...
Accurate to what?
Well, there actually is. So in 2020, and this was the poll I told you about, there's a poll called Atlas Intel. Now they did a recent poll in Pennsylvania showing that 46% of black voters in Pennsylvania were going to vote for Trump. Okay. That just shows you how garbage it is right there. And that's...
Can you explain why that's garbage for people?
Okay. So in let's take the exit polls, which I mean is the best indicator. Of course, the problem is you get them the day of the election, right? The exit polls actually ask people who have voted. Either they're leaving the voting facility or they voted early in person, whatever. They got them in the voter roll as being already voted. At that point, what happens is they call the people, they get a good sample size, a few thousand people, and ask, how did you vote, blah, blah, blah. So in Pennsylvania in 2020, 11% of the electorate in Pennsylvania were African-American or were black, okay, because it's not just African-Americans, it could be others. And I think what was it, is 7% of black voters supported Donald Trump over Joe Biden. So 46% would be not even, we've never seen that. Okay, at least in modern times, we've never seen that. Maybe we saw it like in the 50s with Eisenhower, but even then, post FDR, black voted started drifting over to the Democrats, and it was like JFK that it really kind of flipped and became the strong voting bloc. So what happened? So they're not accurate. Like they'll have their horse race number, and that's the problem. Is a lot of people just look at the horse race number.
What is a horse race number?
So that is just Trump versus Harris.
Yeah.
Who's winning? They won't look at the underlying data or the crosstabs underneath. And if you look at that and all of a sudden you see 46%, you go, okay, this is bullshit. This is a crap poll. But they were deemed, quote unquote, the most accurate in 2020.
Is that because they predicted the election outcome? What was
yes and no. Okay, so this is 538. The problem with 538 is that you literally can have a blindfold on, shoot, and as long as you get it right and you do one poll, then you can be seen as most accurate. Now, if you ever go to 538, you'll see that they, let's say, have the New York Times Siena poll. They might have adults registered voters, likely voters. Now, in the aggregate counts as 3 polls, and they're going to be different. So they will have some variance in the poll. So even if their likely voter number hits the number, they'll say, oh, well, we're aggregating these 3 polls, so therefore the variance was quite wide. Whereas with the Atlas Intel poll, which only has like likely voters, it just happened to be one poll, and they just hit the nail on the head with that one poll. But it punishes pollsters who do multiple polls that actually do want to find out, like especially, for example, some tracking polls, which will do it every. So usually a tracking poll is they do a 3-day split, and then what they'll do is they'll shift over and then drop the last day and add the next day. So it punishes those who actually do run polls a lot. So yeah, you can be lucky if you do one poll and got the number right in an extremely close election that we already know is going to happen. So yeah, it's an issue.
There are 4 quick concepts I want to hit on for what you just talked about that I wish more people would understand, and you can tell me if you disagree with anything. The first thing is just a basic thing: YouTube, Google, whatever. You mentioned a really good poll that has a few thousand people. There's something called the central limit theorem that talks about, like, if you've got a good cross section, 1,000, that's a gold. That's 1,000 people that's an amazing poll. You're at 95% plus.
But not maybe.
What do you mean?
Because of your sampling.
Right.
Well, that's what I said. If you have a good cross section.
Yeah. Okay. If you have a good cross section.
If you have a good cross section, 1,000.
If your methodology is fine, all that.
Amazing. If you have a bad cross section, 500,000 could be a trash poll. Yeah. Right. You do not need to sample 1 million people to know what 1 million people or 10 million people or 100 million people think. It's more, the cross section is way more important than the number, because a lot of people will see a poll like they only sampled 2,000 people. How could they ever know? And it's like that. You're above and beyond what you need to sample at that point, right?
The power of that is incredible.
Yeah. So that's called the central limit theorem. If anyone wants to look that up. Second thing is, polling different cohorts is really important, and I tell this to especially young people all the time. Politicians, at the end of the day, their constituents are voters. Stop. That's it. If you don't vote, not only do they not care about you, they shouldn't care about you. Your voice doesn't matter, okay? Because when it comes time to run for re-election, the people that get them reelected are the people that go to the polls. So if you're in a city and things like crime or how the police interact with people, if that's an important issue to you and you feel like there's an undue weight being put on like crime prevention, right? Well, if you look at the cohorts of who's voting and it's older people, whiter people, wealthier people, it's no surprise that there isn't a huge burden or pressure on the mayor to hire a chief of police who's going to be softer on crime, because 60-year-old geriatric dudes aren't getting arrested. They don't care about that, right? So the cohorts that you're polling are really important, because sometimes people do a poll like 72% of Americans think this or whatever. It's like, okay, well, are these voters or is it just like a broad, whatever? Like, who are you polling? That's important. The third thing here is people don't know all the time. I say this a lot when you talk about data too, or when you look at a chart. It seems very obvious, but it's important to step back sometimes and say, what is this actually saying to you? Like, what is it actually telling you?
Right.
Polls do not tell you who is going to win an election. That's for fortune tellers. A poll is a snapshot in time of a particular cohort that thinks they have a particular response to a particular question. That's it. Sometimes They can be indicative of like future things, sometimes not. But yeah, people sometimes don't, like a lot of people don't know the difference, for instance, between like a poll or a projection, right?
Right.
Somebody will look at like, there was that HuffPo 99% chance to win the election, which was a dumb projection for Hillary Clinton or whatever. I agree. But people are like, how could they have been so off? Like 99% to vote for Hillary? That's so dumb. It's like, no. If all the polling data right now showed like 55 to 45 across all the swing states, the projection for Harris would be 95%, or for Trump would be 95%, right? Projection is not a poll, right? And then the final part is humans. I know that you know this. I know that you.
I'm a human, yes.
No, because you do stats. Humans only know 3 numbers intuitively. They know 100%, they know 50%, and they know 0%. That's it. If you tell somebody that there's like a 40% chance of something happening, if it's less than 50, in their mind, it's 0. That's it. So if you say there's a 40% chance of this outcome and it actually comes to fruition, people are like, oh, you were fucking wrong. You had no idea what you're talking about.
Well, and that's really good, because I saw when you had Mr. Beat here, and you mentioned that during that, and this reminds me of something when it comes to forecasting. Or nowcasting. Let's take the 2000 election here in the state of Florida, and you had, Bush won by 537 votes.
Supposedly.
Okay. Yeah. damn supervisor of elections in Palm Beach. Anyway, because I do believe the voting intention that day was for Gore, but he, at the end of the day, 537 votes. Now, if I made a prediction, I said, I think Gore's going to win by 500. Votes. And I'm wrong. It's still Bush 537. But somebody else makes another prediction, says, I think Bush is going to win by 100,000. People are going to say that person was right because they picked the right person, even though statistically I would be much, much closer to where I'm at. And that's the problem with politics. When it's just, we want to know who it is, not the numbers and how close they are. So yeah, that is a huge problem. And that's the reason why I don't talk about the likelihood of winning in my numbers right now. So I don't know when this is going to come out, but it's like right now I have Michigan as 80% going to Harris. And I think I have Wisconsin like 68 to 73 now for Harris. But yeah, it's
what do you have Pennsylvania at?
Pennsylvania is a different model because they do partisan registration. So I run that a little bit differently. So these are not registered in these states. They don't register by party. So you really got to look at just voting history. And it's just saying, okay, what's the upper bounds, lower bounds, and then kind of see how those are away from 50%, which would be, the majority of major party votes. Pennsylvania is not looking good.
Okay, don't go.
But
go to the next thing.
No, I know, right? But we could be seeing a change. I mean, I hate to be I'm one of those people, and this is one of my quotes, that, the truth is the truth until it's not the truth. And we might be having that with Democrats voting on election day. Maybe, because numbers are not looking right in some places that would bode poorly for the Democrats, but it might be because there's a change, a shift.
Is there I've heard that there's like herding going on with a lot of these like polling. I don't know if that's actually true. I know Nate Silver was talking about this, which I know you have a lot to say about Nate Silver. It at the like basic poll level, when people are seeing like where people are at November 1st or whatever of 2024, is there any level of herding? Because I know my understanding is that people are herding in part because in 2020 and in 2016, based on like a whole number of factors, people kept under predicting Trump's performance.
Right.
And so there's some herding happening, which again, correct me if I'm wrong, but for people who don't know, I think herding is essentially where you like take the poll data and you like slightly push it in one direction or the other based on where you think maybe there's missing data and where you think that missing data would fall.
As part of the answer to that, can you tell me, are secret voters, is that real, where people are answering polls incorrectly intentionally?
So I think there was some research done after it by like the American Public Polling. So I forget what the name of the association was. Basically, and it was like the silent Trump voter.
Yeah.
Right. And they said we really don't see anything in that. So doesn't seem like there is, but it just seems like there's kind of a hole in the research right now for that.
Okay.
It's in
a hole is in like we don't really know about.
Yeah, we don't really know. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but the initial stuff that they researched basically said doesn't seem like that's the case. But then, as far as what you were talking about with the
the herding.
Yeah. I mean, Barack Obama overperformed in 2012. No one ever talks about how Barack Obama overperformed because everyone's like, Romney might win, right? But no, Obama won and overperformed the polls, right? And then what you're talking about, like you say, missing data, this is the problem I have. Once you start interjecting your own opinions in this, then it's no longer science.
Okay, that's what
that's it. That's just
when
like,
I learned about herding, which was like 2 weeks ago, because I'm very new to all of this stuff. The psychometrician in me was like, so anyone who does that is like garbage. Like just take that poll and throw it in the dumpster because what does that even mean? It's very similar in forensic psychology. Right. We have like 2 styles of predicting risk assessment. One is called an actuarial, and the other one is called like clinical, a standard clinical judgment or something like that. The actuarial just like is mathematical. Right. Past history of crime, where do they fall on the psychopathy scale, blah, 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 blah. Like the basic stuff, it's all mathematic. Anyone can do it. You could plug it into a bot and it'll spit out the same answer. Right. The other one allows clinical inference of where you feel. And the clinical inference is always worse performing. It always predicts more poorly. Always, 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 always. And which is why in science, I'm like, if you add human judgment when you already have like mathematical like data there, right, you're just making it worse.
Was there a study, am I making this up? I don't know if I just headline read this, where they got like a bunch of psychologists or whatever to try to predict whether or not people would like reoffend.
Yeah. Yep, they did.
They ended up being worse in chance. And then I think there was another.
They performed worse than lay people.
Worse, yeah. And then there was another one where
bad.
I think I haven't read these. If I haven't read the entire study myself, I don't trust anybody's summary. So I'm giving you just things like headlines that I've read or whatever. So just for everyone who's listening. But is it true that there was the one study where I think a group of psychologists basically faked mental illness symptoms to get into asylums, and then they were allowed in, and when they stopped exhibiting symptoms, it took them a long time to get out?
I've heard about the Stanford study that you're talking about. I actually haven't looked into it closely enough because it feels very headliney. And
it does.
It feels very not true how like they...
Because then the meme was that they said like, okay, well, let's see if you can catch any of our other researchers like faking it, and they ended up catching like 20 people in the next like 2 years, but they didn't actually send anybody. So
I've heard that. I haven't actually looked into whether that's legit. It feels very sussy.
Well, no, I mean, and it's interesting that you mention all this too, because there's one polling company called Trafalgar, and it's a Republican-leaning polling firm. And in their methodology, they say they control for socially desirable biases. Okay, so that
of the polled people.
Yes.
Okay.
And the only thing you could go to, I think, back to what you were talking about with the quote unquote silent Trump voters, is where it basically is like, oh, well, these people really, we see how they fall. I mean, I'm just guessing this is it because it's just weird that they would have this in the first place, saying, oh, well, you know what, this person is probably a Trump voter based on, socioeconomic factors, where they're from and all that. So we think they're giving us the wrong answer. So therefore, they're giving us what they think is the socially desirable answer. So we're going to go ahead and change that. And that's just friggin' nuts to me.
Although do these people realize there are ways to test for social desirability in the MMPI2, and you could just take that and put it into your test and just do it?
No, they don't. They don't want to.
No,
that's the problem.
That would be a really long.
Well, I was going to say, depending on how you, assuming you're approaching that in good faith, which I don't know for this particular institution they are or aren't. Yeah. But I think that there are ways that you should consider this. Like I call these proxy beliefs, or you can, if you want to do philosophy, emotivism, basically. Sometimes people will profess a particular belief, but they don't actually care about that belief, and it's a proxy for something different, right? Like if I talk to you about, if we have a conversation, this would be the most heavy, unbelievable form of priming ever. But if we have like an hour debate about the Second Amendment, and at the end of that debate, I was like, okay, so I guess like, what do you think about, states having the rights to, like ban guns or whatever, like your answer is going to be the Second Amendment reigns supreme. Like in this sense, like I'm completely opposed to the government having the ability to regulate this particular thing at all. Like I'm against like the states having regulatory power. Yeah. You might make that as a broad general statement. And depending on what your frame of mind is, if I pull you, what do you think about the regulatory power of states? It's like, I don't want this, right? But if we were to have a 2-hour debate on abortion, and I were to ask you, what do you think about the state's ability to regulate? And the answer would be the total opposite. The state is incredibly important to protect our children, right? We can't be transing kids. We can't be having abortions. Like, of course, the state has a massive vested interest here in the outcomes. And so if I'm going to shoot a poll out to 1,000 people and I ask them, what do you think about the regulatory power of the state? and I'm not saying that this would even be good. I would obviously I would have to think about this. I'm not a researcher, but like if the national dialogue at that particular moment in time had more to do with guns than abortion, I could definitely see the answers changing because people's opinions on state power is actually a proxy for a deeper social issue that might be more important at the time in the United States. Yeah.
I mean, in that case, you were talking about like your 2-hour thing. You would have to draw it out of people instead of like a poll where it is just yes, no.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is like the poll is.
I mean, I see what you're saying.
It's sitting in the cultural context of, right? Like I bet if I polled people immediately after like a school shooting versus immediately after like a big abortion story, like the answers might change, you know?
Yeah, and okay, like in something like that, maybe, but that's a problem. We don't even know what it is. They usually just do horse race and then do maybe like some U.S. Senate or something like that. And then just the demographics to make sure they can weigh it a certain way or whatever. So the fact that they're not getting really deep into these is, to me, more of an issue. Yeah, because you're talking about an issue there and you're like, okay, I can see that. Now, I bet empirically you can research and say, yeah, with school shootings, you are going to see this because we always, I mean, at least on my side of the aisle, you know, the Democrats, we always see this. It's talked about for 2 weeks, then it goes away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I also think it's funny. You mentioned like when people start injecting opinion into things. One of the funniest things that can happen is when narratives develop around certain issues and they become further and further from reality, and eventually you have to reckon with it. And then once that happens, you look back and you're like, ooh, okay, this made sense the entire time. My favorite examples of this, not to pick a particular person to bully or attack or anything else for whatever reason, but I'm the Bernie Sanders polling and the 2 primaries that he ran, one against Hillary and one against Biden. There were all of these narratives about like, you know, I think he could win these East states and this, and I think this, blah, blah, blah. And by the end, you know, he ends up losing and a bunch of people are devastated. But then when you look back at the polling, it's like, this is really obvious the entire time. Bernie never had a chance at winning either of these primaries. He never polled above like 30, 40% ever. This was just like always the case.
I mean, the same could be said for Hillary.
Sure, for winning the general?
Yeah, against against Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just this, and this is why I have a little bit of faith. Of course, you know, I showed who I was for. A little bit of faith when it comes to the Democrats now is because this might sound bad. I believe a scared electorate is a good electorate. Okay, when you get a little bit complacent, sit there, you think everything's going to be okay. Don't worry, Hillary's going to win this thing. Because I don't think it was a polling problem when it comes to 2016. I think it was a turnout problem. Okay, because you had in certain places a lot less people turning out in these key states. So, and then people say, well, it's not at the state level, it can be a polling problem, but polls don't determine turnout.
Can I ask you a question? Well, you could poll if you're going to go vote.
Yeah, but you see, actually, that's a really important thing because a lot of people. So there was a Marist poll that came out a few days ago, and it showed Kamala Harris winning by like 10% of people who, quote unquote, already voted. Now, this was back when only about 10% of voters had already voted. So that's going to have a high margin of error just for that crosstab alone. And it's self-identified. Sure. Okay, and this comes to the socially desirable answer possibly that they might say, yes, I did vote, when they might not have. So they're not taking it off a voter roll and saying, okay, we've confirmed that this is the case. And the thing is, there was somebody somewhere, I don't know where, that called this an exit poll. And it's not. And now all of a sudden, everyone's like, what about the Marist exit poll? And I'm like, Jesus Christ, I need to like, and it's just kind of explaining it over and over again, but it's gotten into the world some way and people are running with it. And it's, yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question? Because you mentioned this and I'm curious from a data science point of view, is it more correct to try to appeal to a wider base of voters, or is it more correct to try to turn out your own base? Is there like a settled answer there, or does it depend on the season?
I mean, it's really, and this goes to my just practical side of working in campaigns. I mean, some electorates are different than others, right? So, yeah, I don't think that's.
Does it depend on the person, or is it more geographical? Like, is there nuance? What's the nuance?
Well, the geography can determine the person because a lot of them will congregate to one area,
right?
Right. So, I mean, and then again, if we talk about the moderates, goes back to your point. What is moderate, right? And so I think each one just kind of has its own thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there like variables? Because when you're looking at voter polling, obviously you're probably just doing cross-sectional like opinion pieces. But I imagine you guys also, because outcomes and polling preferences are kind of binary, like there's zeros and ones, you could do a lot of interesting predictive stats with that as well. Are there things that are ever successful in predicting who will win, like at all, that is like even like boring stuff? Because there's some basic fundamentals that all campaigns are aware of like, if you don't hit these three things, you will never win. These are always predictive of winners.
So you had a really good quote earlier.
There was a study, and I think it at least was one person from Stanford. It just came out like a few months ago, so you can find out. I'll try to find that for you. That basically said we're talking about poll aggregators like 538 and stuff like that. And they basically said, we don't know if these are predictive or not because we've only had, so I think they did 12, 16, 20. We only have 3 data points as to whether it's accurate or not. That it would actually, to build enough data to determine if this way is accurate, you would need decades, maybe even a millennia to actually, or millennium to actually figure out if this is a statistically significant thing, saying that this actually...
Wait, we've only been collecting that data since 2012?
Polling aggregates. So saying, hey, is polling aggregates, are they correct? And we only have like 3 or 4 cycles. So therefore, we only have 3 or 4 data points as to yes or no being correct. They said it would take, centuries to collect enough data for presidential elections to determine if that's the case.
Oh, interesting. So, I didn't realize can you tell me maybe the difference between, I didn't realize poll aggregators were so new.
Because there weren't that many polls like 20 or 30 years ago, right?
Yeah, it was like Nate Silver got on board. Well, he kind of got out there because, political scientists don't look much into this, but he got out there in 2008 and predicted one of the most easily predictable elections. And honestly, with the exception, if you look in recent, I'll look at my lifetime, okay? I would say 2000, 2016, and maybe 2012 were really the only kind of unpredictable elections that you might not know what's happening on election day. Okay, so a vast majority of elections, you pretty much know going in. Now, this might be a new one. You pretty much know going in, okay, Reagan's going to win in 84. Okay, I guess I should put Carter in 76 as well. But usually they're predictable. And here's the thing. You only have 2 choices. So, okay, it's like going to a roulette wheel. And all the other countries are all the numbers, but the United States is just black or red. And all you have to do, and this goes at a hot hand fallacy, right? Okay, fine, you're getting all these correct or whatever, but you've only done it for a few elections. So, whether they're statistically significant or not, we just need way more data, and that just won't happen for a very long time.
And it might not ever happen. There might not be it might be to get like a 95% confidence interval on a predictive model, you might need like 1,000 presidential elections. Because if there are like 100 and like 85 of them are easily predictable, you've got coin flips from 15 of them. And then there's something that you said that's very true. And it's so true of elections. And I wish people would shut the fuck up about all these types of things. Things are true until they're not. Right. There are so many different bullshit, like if you win these 3 counties, you're guaranteed to win the presidency. Or I think it was if you don't win the primary in Iowa, you'll never win the even though
until
I think
somebody
Biden
does.
Yeah, but then there are so many stupid random things like this that are true until they're not.
Someone's looking for and that is a huge problem I have, because everyone's looking like for the secret sauce to say, oh, look, I predicted this esoteric thing about this county and it showed to be correct, so therefore I know everything about politics. And I'm the total opposite. Whenever people ask me who's going to win, I'm like, I don't know, but at this point right now, it looks like this person is doing better. Yeah. And I would rather be this side than this side. So
it's almost like a perverted form of like p-hacking, which is already perverted, where like if you give me 100 people and you give me every data point about them, I can probably find something odd about the entire group. Right. Probably, right? It's a 95% confidence interval, not 100%. And politics are probably one of the most multivariate macro, it's like encompasses the entire facet of human existence. So yeah, the idea that any singular thing could capture.
The factors that go into predicting it are so much more vast, right? When you look at, there was this incredible forensic study that came out, I think like 20 years ago, that basically collected, I think it was like 56 different possible predictors of recidivism. But also we've got so much data on recidivism, like millions and millions of data points at this point, truly like centuries worth, not like because we've been doing it for centuries, but just because crime happens all the time.
And what happens when it's just anecdotal? Like, okay, right now, talking about this election in North Carolina, North Carolina is really weird because it really has a split of Democrats, Republicans, and independents as far as registered voters, like 33, 33, 33 right now. But if you look at Wake County, which is a very Democratic county, you see a lot of non-party affiliated voters voting. So you can make the deduction, okay, if they're doing that, then maybe those non-party affiliated voters are going over to our side. But again, I don't know. I'm saying, and that's why I put the word maybe instead of, because this is happening, they're definitely doing that. And there's so much of wanting to be definitive in politics now instead of saying, I don't know, and we have to see, and let's see what I think this could happen. I think this could, that's just kind of gone, and it's sucks.
Yeah, and even on those predictions too, you even run into a weird deterministic like if you don't understand the causality, for instance, let's say that in North Carolina, let's say that the way that those independent voters go tends to cause the election. It's not because they're going to every other state and voting. It's because it's a byproduct of national politics. But if you notice that, and let's say people start running ads targeting North Carolina voters so that you can win more of those models, but it's not a byproduct of what's happening in the rest of the country. Well, maybe now you lose the election, but you won that. So now that model is broken, even though it's still kind of predictive, but not because of that. It's a byproduct of something else. So a lot of that is just
everything's right until it's wrong.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about Nate Silver? He's like the most popular pollster that I feel like people hear about. If you're going to talk about polling data and electoral prediction, somebody's going to bring up Nate Silver.
Right.
And I asked you before this, so I'm going to re-ask you as well. I basically asked you, is there any salt to the stake and predicted effect affecting outcomes, where people are putting actual money into these gambling sites essentially to predict the outcome of the election, but they're putting in so much money that there's some people suggesting that it could change how people will vote, because people might be incentivized to vote in one direction or the other because it puts odds in their favor or not to win money from the election. And we started talking about that, but Nate Silver came up in your response to this. So I'm super curious how these two things got looped together, because I paused you to not say it until we were filming.
Right. So, so I went ahead and talked earlier about if people, I don't know, did I mention about if people think someone's going to vote? So what I decided to do is when I was still at McGill, I was going to research whether people who are undecided up to a certain point in the election just simply go with the winner. Right. And I found that they're looking at all the elections from 1960 to, I think at that time it would have been 2016. Okay. And then it would have been 2012. And it just didn't see that data. There was just no relationship. So I was like, okay, people aren't picking people based on who they think are going to win. Right. So I don't think there's any credence in this whole it affects vote choice. Okay. That people want to just be. Okay. Well, that's just for the people who want to win money. Right.
It might affect the one guy's got $1.5 million invested into Trump.
And at the end of the day, he's one vote.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And
I think for that, it is true what you're saying, but it's putting the cart before the horse. I noticed this, actually, funnily enough, yesterday I was talking to a guy, and he said that he actually thinks Kamala is going to win. I think Kamala's going to win, but he said that he would bet me. And I said, well, if I'm going to bet on Trump, you're going to give me odds. And I didn't know where the markets were exactly, but I was like, give me 2-1 and I'll do that.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, fine. So then I bet for Trump to win. And everybody in my chat had no understanding. Why would you ever bet on Trump? I was like, he's giving me 2-1 odds. Of course I will. But the idea that I would bet on a person who I don't want to win and who I don't even necessarily think is going to win, but because the odds are, I don't think that Trump is ever a 1 or 2 dog in the election. I don't think it's ever. So of course I'm taking those odds every single time, but that was inconceivable to people. So I think when people are putting money on a candidate to win, they're not putting the money on them and then changing their vote to match the money. They're only betting on who they think will win anyway, would be my guess.
Yeah. And then you got, the thing with Nate Silver right now, he is a consultant for Polymarket, I guess. And literally, this shows you.
Polymarket, another one where you invest actual money into?
Is it crypto? See, I didn't know about this until 2 months ago.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden people ask me, what is about this? I'm like, okay, what is it? And then I see that Nate Silver is connected with it. And one thing about Nate Silver that's been really interesting is he's been going back and forth on who he thinks is going to win. So, okay, what's the best way to get more and more people to bet on the horse, okay, is by changing it off, on and off. Like if you're at a horse track, which, back in my days, I used to do that in Chicago because we got a ton of them up there. It's like you see the odds of 1, And then as the money comes in, the odds can change, and then you see the odds, and then they go, oh, okay, let's go ahead and put it on that one now too. The last time I saw Nate Silver's prediction was in 4 days out. I think it was 269. And it's like, okay, everyone make up your own decision. So I think the problem, as far as voters, I don't think it matters. Okay, I think there's just financial incentive for certain people. And in this case, it's more about how can the House win. And I don't know how the House is in these poly-market things. I don't know how that works. But
It should be like traditional, like same thing with horse betting, right? You lay odds based on who's betting where, and then you make money that way by skimming.
I mean, yeah, I don't know how that actually, because I mentioned something and somebody says, oh, it's not like a traditional gambling thing. I'm like, well, then what is it? Yeah.
Okay. So. Do you think in general, though, Nate Silver is broadly like a pretty solid political scientist?
Oh, he's not a political scientist. He's a statistician.
Okay.
He is not, I mean, his father, I guess, was, but he doesn't, he just takes all the, I guess, like the human aspect out of it and just looks at stats. Okay. And that's fine to a certain extent. But you need to be, I think if you're in political science, you need to somewhat be informed of like why things are happening, just having a good idea. This is a really good example. I was at, I think in 2014. Yeah, 2014, I was at the Midwest Political Science Conference in Chicago, Palmer House. They have it every year. And there were these two political scientists. They're from Stanford. I think they were from Stanford. Anyway, they're presenting this, and this thing that showed all of their algorithms and all their statistics and everything like that. Then they came to their conclusion and they said, well, we found out from this that an overwhelming majority of black voters vote Democratic. And everyone's sitting there going, okay. And it was like, we kind of know this. This is common sense to everybody in this room. And what's really happened in political science is you have a lot of people in statistics who want to get into a PhD program. They can't get into it with statistics, so they go into political science and just show off their statistical skills instead of having any interest really in politics. And this is becoming a bad thing in politics right now in academia. It's just like being overwhelmed with statisticians that have no real concept of just how politics work.
This reminds me of like, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as far as methodology, now if you get people that are in, international relations, comparative politics, American politics, it's different. But when you look at political methodology specifically, it's just becoming statisticians that are not informed as to like something as simple as knowing that an overwhelming majority of black voters vote Democratic. I mean, that's just, anybody knows that in this field.
Gotcha. Okay. And so what are some of the errors that you're seeing other than it seems like that error is essentially reporting excitedly on something where you're like, yeah, duh.
Yeah.
Is there any other issues? Because I feel like a lot of people, when they've probably heard this discussion, they've been like, wait, isn't quant good? Numbers are good. Empiricism, statisticians are just the extreme version of that. They're just the numbers guy and the numbers guys only. Now you're telling me you want some like human elements. I thought we already established that was like bad for the data and for the analysis. So like, what are the issues that come in if you're not grounded in the field itself, even if you're grounded in the mathematics?
Okay, so like let's talk about Nate Silver 538 in general. Like there are two issues I have with it.
538 is
so that was the site Nate Silver started. I think it ended up being with the New York Times, and like it's now part of ABC News, and he's not with it anymore, I don't think.
He's definitely not.
Yeah, because because the numbers are different, right? But anyway,
and he took his model with him, I think, too. So some people don't like the new 538 or don't like it or whatever, but yeah.
Right, yeah. And so there are a few things. So when looking at modeling, okay, first of all, it's not a forecast. It's a nowcast. So a nowcast takes the data that we have now and determines what the situation is. As you mentioned, a poll is a snapshot in time. So you can't really make a forecast out of a bunch of data that is a snapshot in time right now. Okay, so it is a forecast model. The second problem I have with
Outcast model.
Or it's a nowcast model. Yes, thank you. The other thing is Professor Michael Lewis Beck of University of Iowa is kind of like one of the big names in predictive modeling for elections. And he mentioned that there needed to be three things. He might have added a four, but there are three things. First, model has to be accurate, which goes without saying. The second one is lead, which is that how far in the future can you tell electoral outcomes. So a lot of these are based off of maybe economic models. So prospective voting, retrospective voting, the idea of you look at the past award punishment system, prospective voting, you look at the likelihood in the future. And I think that Kamala Harris has done a really good job making this a retrospective voting under Biden to a prospective voting environment under her. But the third thing they talk about is parsimony. And the idea of parsimony is you need as few variables as possible to actually explain what's happening. And one of the problems with the 538 and the Nate Silver models is they'll have one variable. And in that one variable, they'll have 8 other variables. And then that will be one variable to then describe this other variable. And it just becomes, and the fourth one is that it can be reproduced.
Can you give me an example of the one it sounds like, so there's a primary variable and then tertiary variables that are
right. So like there's one that's like in 538. There's one like if they're looking at state level, there's like an economic type of variable, and then in the state they take like 8 separate different things regarding the economy in that state and then put it in one variable.
So they'd probably include like GDP, blah, 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 blah.
Right. I mean, they probably include all that, but then you get all of these variables, and it's like for the lay person who's just looking at aggregating polls, taking, saying, okay, this is 45%, this is 47%, okay, it's 46%. They have all these other variables that become where it's harder to reproduce the poll. And I think what's happening is more and more variables are being created in order to justify being correct. And so it's becoming less and less parsimonious.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to psychology because that's my...
No, you're going. That's fine.
In IQ testing, we have like primary and tertiary variables.
Right.
So we might have something like fluid reasoning. But then under fluid reasoning, depending on how many subtests you give, there's like 2 to 5 subtests that are fluid reasoning related. They're all like loaded when you do like a cross-sectional like correlation. They load onto fluid reasoning the most strongly compared to other subtests,
right.
But they're also like a little bit specific. Some of the subtests that are fluid reasoning also have a little bit of vocab, et cetera, et cetera. But they mostly load into fluid reasoning. So you like create an index that loads into fluid reasoning. And then you have 5 variables in the new IQ tests. We use 5, you use 4, that then is loaded together to create the G, the FSIQ. Is this similar to what we're obviously the variables will be different, but if you've got like, if fluid reasoning was like economy, would under economy be something like GDP of state, employment rate? Would it be things like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And even then, I don't know how much it weighs into their model, right? They're like, okay, we have this. And I don't know how it doesn't seem like I've been looking. I can't see.
Like, are they running like internal alphas for the variables to the? Yeah.
See, that's the thing. They'll mention a variable, but they won't say how it impacts.
They don't even report the
anything. And I think it's just because the average person is there, say, oh, okay, I see this. That's all I need.
Yeah, they're not going to have any idea. About,
right.
Like, alpha,
So the issue, there's I kind of disagree, but I kind of agree. Or maybe we agree. So the issue, to summarize, is when you're looking for parsimony, parsimony isn't necessarily better, but what we definitely don't want to happen is, let's say that we have a volleyball teams, okay? And let's say that we do a volleyball playoffs, and on one side we have high schoolers, and then on the other side we have professional past college teams,
right?
Okay? And let's say that we develop a theory and we're like, my hypothesis is that the people who are the tallest are the ones who are winning the games, okay? Well, it's like 50-50 because like the professionals are obviously the ones winning. Right. Well, okay, well, fuck, how do I account for this? Well, it's not just the tallest, it's also the tallest and the people who have, it's the tallest and the people who get the nicest uniforms.
Right.
And this might be a little bit closer because, say, professionals have not as great uniforms as like college athletes, right? And what happens is you're creating all of these different variables to try to measure something, but instead of it looking like you're creating a good model that retrospectively could have predicted that data and then prospectively predicts data, you're just adding on another variable every time to try to make the data fit, basically.
So there is a point where you are adding so many variables, you're just describing the population.
Exactly. Yeah.
And see, that's the big problem.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you're subjectively weighing each of your sub things, and it's like, okay, well, fuck, what the fuck are you even saying?
So yeah, like I can say, I could do, okay, if I want to do a predictive model, okay, I can say a variable, is the candidate a man or a woman? Up to this time, that has been a very predictive model. Okay. Of course, you have two men. I mean, obviously, if they're running against each other. But now let's say I say I'm going to describe a car. I'm going to say, and I'll just tell you what kind of car I'm thinking. I say it's an American-made car. Okay, that narrows it down. It's an American-made car in the 1970s. That narrows it down. It's an American-made car that gas tanks exploded when they were hit in the back. That narrows it down to Pintos, right? So even though I have three variables, it kind of starts narrowing who actually can fall into there. So that's the thing with parsimony. You want parsimony. Obviously, you don't want to just have, is the candidate a male or female? There's got to be causal relationship. And there is sometimes, I think, possibly with that. But you can't just have all the variables that you're just describing what it is we're looking at.
The only scary thing about parsimony is that sometimes in an effort to have harmony in our data, I think that sometimes people might have an impossible assumption that a thing could be captured by an individual variable. Like I said earlier, and I think we agreed that politics is probably one of the most macro multivariate things in the world. It might not be possible to capture the sentiment or to capture where people would vote with a single variable. That might be a thing that is just an insanely multivariate analysis. But then the issue you run into is if you have to reform your model after every single election, I mean,
then the accuracy.
What good is your model?
Yeah, at that point, you're breaking the number one rule, which is accuracy.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that parsimony, it is, I mean, you can change it. And again, it goes back to the whole idea of it's right until it's not right. It's good until it's not good. And everyone wants it. I'd rather, like with this situation right now in the election, I'm looking at my models and I think something's happening. And, and this is where I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm fine if it's wrong. Okay. I learned something. I gained some new perspective, burn it down and build something new that might actually explain the new reality. But I'm not going to sit there and say I was right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's the big problem right now.
There's also something interesting that I just realized when you guys were talking about this. Like when I talk about FSIQ, the brain is fixed to some degree, and that unless humans evolve overnight really quickly and like develop a new lobe, the brain is the brain is the brain. And there's like elements of it, there's like neuroplasticity, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of a fixed thing. Right. Politics is like fundamentally not fixed. It can't be.
Like measuring IQ is one thing, but making predictions from IQ might be a different thing. Where we're like, that's going to be harder. Not necessarily that's impossible, but that's going to be harder than maybe measuring, G or whatever.
Well, like, like in IQ, you've got like a jar that's blacked out and like FSIQ measures are like shaking the jar around trying to figure out what the shape is on the inside. The problem with politics is that somebody's reaching in all the time to the jar and changing what shape's in there anyways.
Right. Yeah, one day you shake the jar and it's a bunch of balls. The other day you shake the jar and it's full of like goo.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
What the fuck is going on
But it doesn't change as much as people think.
Okay.
And I think that's just what it is. If we look essentially, at least nowadays, if we look essentially from 1992 to now, the electoral map has been somewhat, not totally, but somewhat fixed. You have the left coast going for, the Democrats. You have the Northeast usually going for Democrats as well. Yes, you get this is, back in let's say 72 when Nixon won in a landslide or Reagan in 84, we weren't really talking about swing states. Now we are talking about those swing states, and it's because we have changed. We have, I think, been more fixed. Because the question I ask you is, could you ever see in today's political climate a 1984 Reagan-type landslide or 1964 Lyndon Johnson-type landslide? I'd figure if there were any election, it would have been all these ones that Trump has been involved in. It has not happened. So, yeah.
One thing, too, that can happen is sometimes things change dramatically, but it's not necessarily the things changing. It's like how we view the things. One thing that I realized around the Brexit time is I very much bought into this concept of blue state, red state. And now, especially post-Brexit, and then looking back at the United States, now I realize that it's not really blue states and red states. It's very much like blue cities and red rural areas. And that like every city is blue and every rural area is red, which is funny because going back to the quantitative thing, quantitatively, that was hard for me to see because I just look at states. Qualitatively, that's incredibly fucking easy to see. Anybody that's gone to Austin, okay, will tell you that Austin, Texas is not like the deep south. You're not in a random place in Alabama. Or anybody that's been to Bakersfield in California, this is not San Francisco.
Right.
So that's another interesting phenomenon too, is that we have a huge rural city divide sometimes that's like completely lost in that's a super red state and that's a super blue state because like the cities themselves are very blue. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I'll say, I'll push back against this a little bit, and then I'll also kind of agree. It's really funny that I guess economists are either bored or economics is too hard, or they think the economists think they're the best soft scientists because they do so much statistical analysis. And because of that, they like to tinker in all the other sciences. And anytime you're reading like crime research or whatever, it's always interesting to look, it's like, what the fuck? There's a lot of economists that are writing on every fucking issue in psychology or whatever. Yep. And sometimes that could be stupid and memey because, like you said, a data analyst will come in and they'll look at a particular thing and it'll be like, yeah, obviously we know this. I will say, though, sometimes having totally fucking clueless outsiders coming in and running forms of analysis can be very healthy for the field because those people just aren't trained in that area and everything is becoming more multidisciplined. Something that she brought up earlier, one of the big busts of the most cited amyloid plaque beta Alzheimer's disease papers, that was busted by, I think, a person that just does incredibly crude, that's mean to say crude, but they do like image analysis where all they do is they just go through and they're like, how likely is it that this image is this image?
I saw, yes.
And the debunking of that study was just like, oh, this image is just this with like the saturation turned down 5 notches. And, and that destroyed the whole study.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
And that might be a thing
it led to the wave of presidents and everything because they were like, oh no, people are like fudging these images and we had no idea.
Yeah. So sometimes it's good to have people from the outside come in because multidiscipline approaches are good, but but people need to recognize like when they step into a new area, like I have a new set of people are so orthodox about like their academic approach of view to the world. And they have a really hard time saying like, I have a really valuable tool. Let me add it to your toolkit, and then let's like look at things. But they'll think like I can solve all of this with my toolkit.
Right.
But
well, see, and this is actually something I think is a problem in political science is that politics has become more quantitative, where it was a qualitative field for many, many years until about, I'd say, 20 years ago, it really started getting quantitative. And you're now asking somebody who wants to get a PhD in political science, you need to know stats and you need to know about government. And I think it'd be better if you had the political scientist say, hey, I got this theory, I have this, whatever. Stats guy, go out there and get the data, go ahead, run whatever, come back to me, tell me what you have. It creates that nice divide of the people who are knowledgeable in political science and then the people who are knowledgeable. Because I might be in stats, I might be a person who doesn't know stats as well as a statistician, which I don't. Okay, so they might think of something that I can't even think of, but they're not going to think of the theory or causality of certain vote choices or whatever. And I think that could be beneficial.
Yeah, like a multidisciplinary approach. You've written a lot about Florida, specifically why Democrats are basically doomed here. So it's interesting because in like the early 2000s, it was viewed as like one of the deepest purple states. So what has changed in Florida and how did it become this like red stronghold essentially in like the 20 years since it was viewed much more as a swing state? It's just not really a swing state anymore.
No. And I mean, it wasn't before. So, I mean, Florida was one of those, it was one of those Dixiecrat states. So conservative, Southern, segregationist Democrats. But even in 1960, it started voting Republican at the presidential level. And I don't even mean the federal level like Congress or U.S. Senate, but at the presidential level. It didn't make that switch over to being a quote unquote swing state until about 92, 96. You had Bill Clinton win it. 2000, we all know what happened there.
We don't. Not everybody knows what's happening.
What happened in 2000?
Of really bad stuff that should absolutely.
Right. I mean, that could be a whole show in and of itself.
I actually have no idea what happened in 2000.
So the whole entire election was based on Florida. And that's why I was talking about Al Gore lost it by 537 votes.
Right.
Right. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's the case. So, yeah.
The big dramatic thing. This was a thing that I will admit I lightly looked into, and as soon as I started looking into it more, I got so infuriated with it that I stopped. Same thing with the Ken Starr investigation for the Bill Clinton modeling stuff. Oh my God, I hate conservatives. I'm sorry. But my understanding is basically when you in the United States of America, when you hit certain closenesses, that's not a real word. When you're within a certain margin for an election, you basically get to say there's an automatic recount that's triggered, or you get to ask for a recount and you have that right afforded to you. And Florida, there were counties that were absolutely, like you said, it was hundreds of votes off. Yeah. And I believe, I don't remember exactly why, but there was reason to believe that a recount, I think most people agree that Gore would have won on the recount. Right. But however, when they did the recount, back at the time, we had this thing called the Electoral Count Act, which apparently means fuck all. It was the big law that the Trumpers wanted to violate to get Pence to choose the winner of the election. But the ECA has certain safe harbor deadlines.
Statute.
What? Oh yeah, good one. The ECA has certain safe harbor deadlines for your vote needs to be counted by this date so that your electors can certify the election and mail the results to Congress. And because of I don't know if it was taking. Go ahead.
No. You're
Okay.
good.
I don't know if it was taking too long to recount or something, but they like triggered the recount. They were doing it, and then I think it was Bush asked for an injunction and basically said, "Hey, listen, they're going to run into their elector certification date. You need to stop the recount." And the Supreme Court said, "Okay, sure, we'll stop it." And then that didn't happen. And Gore probably, I think most people agree on recount, would have won the election. But the Democrats said, okay, we acknowledge the Supreme Court, fucked us and stopped us. And then Bush went on to win that election. And this was in like early December.
And this is the process by which legitimate the multiple electoral slates can be submitted, right? This is the legal means by which
you could do it, but they didn't even consider it back then.
Well, the Constitution says it's up to the states to determine how to administer their elections. Right. So I don't know. I think that's in the First Amendment. It might be in the Second Amendment, but pretty sure it's the First Amendment. Or not, excuse me, First Article.
Yeah.
Which is why you have some states that split their electoral votes.
Right. So there actually was, and if you ever want to watch a movie that just kind of encapsulates this whole thing, watch the movie Recount. It has Kevin Spacey in it, but yeah, watch the movie Recount. And there was a point where Tom Feeney, who was the Speaker of the House in Florida at this time, said, "Hey, listen, if we hit the certification deadline, they haven't determined anything yet. The House can just go ahead and the legislature can just go ahead and deem Bush the winner of the electoral votes." Mm-hmm. That's what scares the hell out of me in our current context right now, is that there might be delaying of counts, and then all of a sudden, you have the legislature or somebody coming in. This is why in the state of Florida particularly, we used to have, well, I guess I can't say we, I don't live here anymore. Florida had an elected Secretary of State. Okay, they went ahead and made that an appointed position. So now the governor can just pick the Secretary of State out, and they're the ones who are going to determine the certification or not. So to me, that's kind of scary. But yeah, so back to Florida. So I was saying it was like 537 votes. So it was close. 2004 was close, and then we had that. But then what happened? And it was close up until I would say 2018, because the gubernatorial race was real close between Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum. So it was a really close race as well. So a few things. One, the Florida Democratic Party is just horrible.
I've heard that.
Okay, it's
Why?
just. It's
I've heard they're super weak, disconnected.
it's just about money.
Oh.
Okay, it's just about money. Just if you want to talk about Miami-Dade County and consultants that are probably living in and around here, right here, just look at Billy Corbin, who did the Netflix series, some of the Netflix series on there. He ran for the Democratic Party chair here in Miami-Dade County. He decided to withdraw. He was starting to expose some of the basically pay-to-play schemes. That's what it is. I know people who have, before I even started in 1991, they were consulting and they were losing constantly. They're still in the game today. And it's just kind of like the cycle is, let's say you're a candidate that wants to run. You go to your local Democratic Party. That Democratic Party recommends this consultant. This consultant then, loses your election, and it's just the cycle. Because the problem with politics in general is you just kind of, I hate to say like fresh meat, but you kind of have fresh meat every time. So it keeps this cycle, and there's no accountability for winning in the state of Florida. And if you look at, let's say, the presidential race, because people say, oh, well, what about the presidential race? A lot of times the Obama campaign or Clinton campaign or whatever will do their own separate thing and just not work with the Florida Democratic Party, like at all.
Really?
They'll just like, we're doing our own thing. And it's so funny.
Because the consultants within the Democratic Party are so notoriously bad
Yeah,
at their
and
job.
the party itself. And what's weird is the Democrats here in the state, let's say you have a Senate race or a congressional race. So you have the DTRIP, which is the Democratic Campaign Congressional Committee, and then the same thing with the Senate as well, DSCC. What will happen is the Democrats in the state of Florida will complain that their Senate seat isn't being targeted. And then DSCC, for example, comes in, brings staffers and money and all that. And then the Florida Democratic Party or the campaign complains, oh, well, these people are from Pennsylvania or something like that. They don't know the states. So it's like whenever they're given the help, then they bitch about the help. Okay. And it's just becoming a state that nobody wants to deal with. But why it's changed, I truly believe that with Ron DeSantis winning in 2018, then the onset of COVID, Florida has just become a state of either very rich people who want tax cuts or Florida man. I mean, that's basically what Florida is. When I moved here, and that was in 1987, I would say it was kind of a middle-class utopia. Like you could live in a nice house and have a car, and it was affordable, and taxes were low, and it was great. Now it's just not like that. And I think DeSantis's hard line on COVID and all these types of things fundamentally changed. And one of the other things about Florida in particular is that one of the problems with Democrats, they only look at like Miami-Dade County, Broward, Palm Beach, Orange County, and others. Don't realize that counties like Lee, where Fort Myers is huge. Pasco County, north of Tampa. You have a lot of these exurb counties or now suburban counties that are just really huge. And the Democrats can't even think about they don't even know they exist. They're still in this like 20-year ago frame of mind of, as long as we win Broward, Palm Beach, and Miami-Dade, which they can't even win Miami-Dade now, that's all we care about.
Right.
It's a lot of people in America, we use geographical terms to describe things, but it's not really geographical. For instance, if you live in like New England, like nobody would ever say Miami, that's East Coast. That's just it's not really. Miami's not an East Coast city, but it's on the East Coast, right?
Right.
There's an interesting divide in Florida. You're kind of talking about like Florida part of Florida is the South, but the South of Florida is not the South. Right. Tampa and Orlando and Miami, that's not the South. But you go up to like Jacksonville, like at the Panhandle and shit, which is I think the largest like suburb like sprawl in the entire country, right? Is very much different than the rest of Southern Florida. And they're two very, very different constituencies that you have to play into there. Yeah. One thing that you mentioned is funny that we have firsthand experience with this. We were actually complaining about it because we do a decent amount of like on the ground political work, like canvassing. It drives me fucking crazy sometimes how much you're like reinventing the wheel constantly. And it's like, are there no long-term fucking political operatives that know how all these operations work? It feels like every single campaign that's spun up, especially at the local level, is like, all right, it's day one of politics. How do we get people to knock on doors? How do we work with a party? How do we do, and there are some long-term things like Van. It's like an application you can use to go and find registered voters and shit. Yeah. But like, this is one of the largest complaints that I heard contrasting the Clintons with Obama, is that the Clintons seem to be more invested in like kind of long-term health and infrastructure for the party. And one of the complaints that I hear over and over again about Obama is, for as good of a campaign as they ran and as effective, or he was a president, he won his elections, that they were really bad about leaving behind any sort of long-term infrastructure or empowering other people in the party to do anything.
Oh yeah, that's definite. Some of those people ended up, being part of Democratic politics here because just by virtue of them living here, right? But that is true. And that's what I was talking about when the National Party comes in, they just do their own thing. Obama was definitely one of those. But now you've come to the point that you now have more than 1 million more registered voters who are Republican than Democratic now. And the question in Florida. And it just comes to that point of, is Florida even worth saving? Because I'm just at the point myself. I'm like, hey, if I'm the big person that determines everything, I'm going to spend money in North Carolina, Georgia, possibly Texas. That's where that goes. Why would I put it in Florida right now, especially when, Ron DeSantis won with 59% of the vote, and the composition of the electorate in Florida as of right now is essentially near that same composition. So I don't see, unless, again, it's right until it's wrong, unless all of a sudden we see a lot of independents switching over to the Democrats. Right now if you just make the assumption, just a general assumption, that all the Republicans vote Republican, all the Democrats vote Democrat, which a lot of people like to poo-poo on that, but it is still the number one determiner of vote choice compared to gender or race or anything like that, or income. Let's say that they all vote 100%, and then the independents that are left, the Democrats would basically have to win 76% of them as of right now. That's not going to happen.
Right.
So yeah.
It's interesting. The thing that you're telling me is this interesting tale of essentially how I think a lot of people, when they get into politics, this is something I've learned this last year working with the canvassing and stuff like that, is that it feels really, really big. You're like, I can't have a national impact. I can't even have a state level impact. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out if the Florida Democrats and kind of that, it sounds like a little bit of like that nepotistic, politicsy, like we just pick our friends and our friends are all incompetent. It's probably a handful of people that are by and large driving the ship into the coast, basically.
Oh, it is.
Right? And it's interesting because what people don't realize is that if you can get out, if it can be like 6 to 12 people that ruin an entire party statewide, which impacts the national level politics, it can also be 6 to 12 people that change all of that stuff, right? It's very interesting. One of the biggest lessons I've had this last year is realizing you truly are like 1 to 2 rooms away from some of the most powerful people in the world. And I don't think people give a lot of gravity to that, right? Like the reality is that like, if I'm here talking to you guys, but you've talked to Jordan Peterson is like right within the circle of like Elon Musk, who's now working with Donald Trump, right? It's like, that's like 3 rooms away from me, which is crazy to think about. And especially at a political level, I feel like one of the biggest things I learned this year, like working with some level like politician-y politico types, is being like, there's just a lot of like really deeply incompetent people, it feels like, within the electoral system. Maybe this is all systems. I feel like when I was in private industry, though, there was way less incompetence.
One of the things that, this is a whole other can of worms to open, but one of the really fucking annoying misconceptions about politics that I think drives this actually quite a bit is that people just have a horrible preconceived notion of what politicians, their lives are like, where the understanding is like, oh, you work in politics and a government, you must be a fucking millionaire getting paid bribes and, lobbyists like, schmoozing you all the time. It's like, bro, if you're at the fucking state level, these people are, I don't want to say broke, but like these are not super ultra wealthy people. There is no glory. Like the people that are here, these people are here because they're very passionate about what they're doing. And the passion is the only driver. Because if they were super competent or whatever in some other thing, these motherfuckers are getting a job somewhere else. Yeah. They're not doing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that that's super important to remember that, like, if you are passionate and decently competent, there just is a career for you in politics. There really is. Yeah. Because I do see that rewarded as well within politics, that like, it feels like once like a political person is like, wait, that's a competent person. Like all of a sudden they're like, hey, do you want to work on this? Do you want to work on this? Do you want to work? And like, you're getting like pulled in to a certain extent until like the politicsing starts up and the feelings start.
And it's weird because that's kind of one of the reasons, or the main reason, maybe the sole reason, to be honest, why I left politics, because you didn't find competent and, dare I say it, intelligent people sometimes. Okay, so it would be like, okay, I have the numbers here. Let me explain them to you. Go ahead and explain them in as much of layman's terms as I think I'm explaining them. And then they don't get them. Like, okay, let's do it again. And then do it again. Well, what if this happens, this happens? Okay, let's do that again. It comes to a point, and I think this is one of the problems is, as I mentioned, you always have fresh, red meat coming in. You're always getting new candidates who have never done this before. And so they need the staff there to be able to, make the decisions as to whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. And we don't, Florida is a state that does not have that. You're right. And you just talked about that. Whereas, let's say the state of Illinois, those people have been there 30 years, but look at the state of Illinois. They have, super majorities, I think, in the legislature, and the Democrats win all the time, right? They might be corrupt, but they're competent as far as winning elections. But yeah, and I think just having that staff is, and people just get discouraged here. I mean, I don't, because I had floated around the idea of running for Florida Democratic Party chair if I came back here. I wouldn't even touch that with a 1,000-foot pole right now. Because I'm just like, that ship isn't a sinking one. It's okay, we talked about the Senate race and presidential race. It's now to the point where it can get close, but it won't get over. Okay, let's say it's maybe 53-47 of major party votes. That could happen. It's just that the Democrats, for the Republicans, it's just that the Democrats can't get that 50% plus one. The numbers are just against them now. And then you'll have the Democrats saying, oh, well, you should put more money into the party. But it really isn't that. It's just just look at the voter registration numbers. I mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, after living here for a few years, I understand why people wouldn't support the Democrats as much, because they've made how many fucking hurricanes now?
That's
They've been
true.
sending towards my fucking state. Okay. What do you want me to vote for the party of hurricanes?
Yeah, Tampa was blue, and you guys just sent another hurricane towards us. I don't know what you want us to do.
Well, and you were talking about like how Florida is all these different things. Like me being from Orange County. I mean, even though I'm from Chicago originally, I kind of still consider Orange County, Orlando my home. Coming down here, I feel like I'm in a totally different state, if not a different country. I mean, that just shows
Like
how
in Miami compared to Orlando?
no, just like South Florida.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's a totally different place. Versus
Right.
you go to Central Florida, you go up to like the Panhandle. These are completely different. It's like
Right.
going to Texas, like Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. Like these are like their own places, and then the rest of Texas is just a totally different monster.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been to Lubbock, yes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, we're a little over 2 hours.
Yeah, I was going to say, all right, I want you to tell the camera, as of November 1st, 2024, who do you think is going to win the election, and what confidence level do you give that?
Okay, over there. Look at
That one, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with just the swing states, right? Because we got to look at the states. Wisconsin, I feel confident that the Democrats will win. Same thing with Michigan. Both of those models are looking quite well as far as the nowcast model. And when we look at Michigan, it has a lower turnout rate, so we have a lot of the vote already in. That feels good. Pennsylvania, I'm a little bit worried about. I'm afraid it's going to start being one of the next Floridas or Ohio's. But the thing with Pennsylvania right now is that very, very few of the vote actually is early voting. An overwhelming majority will come on election day. Now, when it comes to Georgia, we might have a record turnout in Georgia, and it's basically dead even. When it comes to North Carolina, kind of the same thing. We have all of the voters spread out. We have essentially 33% of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It's going to be very close. The ones that I would say are kind of off are Nevada. It's not looking as good, and this was a reliable Democratic state to some extent for the last few cycles, and Arizona as well. But in both of those states, we need a lot of independent voters to turn out, and they usually trend Democratic.
Can I ask you a quick thing? For Pennsylvania, has the Puerto Rican comments, do you think that's shifted anything there? Or
I see, and that's kind of hard to determine because Philadelphia has been having some problems getting their ballots in.
Okay.
You're not going to really know that until the exit poll. And even then, I think you need to, I don't know if it would be enough of a sample size to do that. You would probably have to oversample the Puerto Rican population. Yeah.
So Kamala, Trump, who do you think has it and what percent?
So you're doing the thing that I hate.
I know. But you can say like 50%. Okay, you can give it a low confidence.
Well, if I say 50%, then that means I'm right either way. So there we go. No, I mean, there's something happening. And I'm not one of those people that take that lightly, but it just does seem like the election day vote might be more Democratic because we're seeing the Democrats doing significantly worse in early voting in Pennsylvania. And I'm like, what does that mean? And North Carolina, actually, they're doing a bit worse. I'm like, either they're going to kill North Carolina, which nothing indicates that, or there's a change in trends. I think we might be seeing this. Of course, we don't know until 4 days from now.
Another topic. I'm so curious how much the statements from Trump and the attitudes towards the early voting and the mail-in ballots last time are impacting it this time. Because last time, Donald Trump was very big on voting the day of. He repeated that a ton. And I wonder if that I know it drove some conservatives away from voting via mail-in ballots. I wonder if it drove some people away from voting early. And maybe now that they're not being driven away from it anymore, maybe now they want to vote, early more than they did. But yeah, who knows?
I think he's even been encouraging early voting a little bit, hasn't he?
Maybe. Yeah.
Well, he has. But another thing too, I think when people start seeing ballot boxes being burnt in, fires to them in Portland and in Vancouver, Washington, I think a lot of Democrats are like, holy hell, I'm not going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to wait until election day. And I think the Democrats have become really scared of having their ballot in a mailbox or in somebody else's hand for a bit of time, that they're like, okay, again, this is just, I've heard this anecdotally. It's just a gut. It's not statistically driven. Well, it is kind of maybe if we say, hey, listen, these numbers for Democrats are down in some of these states as far as registered Democrats turning out. Usually Democrats should be up by 5-6% when it comes to North Carolina. They're actually third right now by like 0.5%. Okay. That tells me something's happening because why break the trend?
Okay. Cool. Interesting. Where can people find you? What should they look up to find more stuff from you?
Okay, so you can go to my YouTube channel, which is Voting Trend. You can just put that into the search. You can also go to my Substack. I write on that, so just votingtrend.substack.com.
All right. And speaking of analytics, I checked our YouTube stats recently, and 63% of our viewers are not subscribed to the channel. So if you're watching, if you enjoy Bridges, please consider subscribing on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, get all your good stuff. And of course, we have a Patreon where we do early releases, so you'll get access to this episode much quicker, although the turnout on this episode so fast that might not actually turn out that well for Patreon. But in general, you get extra content, early access, and eventually some behind the scenes when we kind of have enough behind the scenes aggregated. So check us out on Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. That's the main way that we can keep doing these things. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Okay.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we'll have a good one.
Thanks.
The news is divided. Ground News puts it back together, so you can see how many sources are reporting on any breaking story, where they fall on the political spectrum, how reliable they are, and who owns them. Compare headlines and read full articles to see which details are prioritized, exaggerated, or left out entirely. Because the more we understand the media, the more we'll understand each other. Visit ground.news to learn more.